Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. The framed photograph was torn off the wall and thrown to the floor, where in a moment the thin glass protecting the old picture cracked under the weight of the man's boot. However, the photo was trampled not out of pure malice, though in principle there was enough of it in the man who had smashed the house, but simply because it had fallen under his foot. And the man didn't look where he was stepping. "You'll die soon, old woman," she said through her teeth. "Where are you going to buy them?" Charles almost fell on the ice, sitting down on the wooden floor of the archway, and cursed foully, pushing, knocking over along with the porcelain dog figurines. Damn it. He couldn't find the money, though he knew for a fact there was some here. There must be a hateful old woman always. He knew she'd always been known to be a super uncle, so she must have some money, and he needed it badly. Don't be quiet. Drunk. And he poked and turned to the object of his long-standing hatred. Tell me where the money is, and I'll leave. I've got to go to the edge. But Nancy didn't answer. Charles knew it. Knew it out of spite. Cursed, I guess. The old woman was ready to die and clutch her pennies. Oh yes, she was always so greedy, and she didn't spare him for the sake of money. She'd ruined her own grandson. The wretch. But Nancy did not answer, and Charles did not know that she was silent now, not out of malice, not out of greed, but because she just couldn't understand why he was being so mean to her on this night when a long unexpected guest began to rampage through her house. Nancy simply slept a peaceful sleep, having spent another gray monotonous day of which her life now consisted. In general, in the village of Zorka she was not the only soul missing, as they call it. There were its drunks and debauchees, there were its lonely pensioners. But only Nancy was so unloved, not a quiet, lonely old lady, but exactly that unloved person who made a very strange impression on everyone. Apparently she wasn't doing well at home, but let's hope. She is crazy, not violent, in such a way Lyubasha liked to express herself. A saleswoman of the only grocery store. The customers usually agreed. And seeing Nancy off, who, having made some simple purchases for her pension, went away with curious glances, also fought among themselves, in some words about, for instance, whether Nancy had relatives with whom she was in quarrel or was just lonely altogether. No one really knew, but theories were being made. Nancy had come to Zork 6 years ago and had been strangely, mysteriously withdrawn even then. The people who sold her a house on the outskirts of the city said that the passport said that the person was only 66 years old, but looked 80 years old. Apparently, life has been very hard on her. After all, women, as it is known, their hardships are reflected on their faces. Retirement age allowed Nancy not to care about work, and she just lived a solitary life, a hermit. She got her pension, bought groceries, and stayed at home. Other inhabitants of Zork in the spring, of course, who little by little, and who seriously cared for their plots, planted in vegetable gardens, planted gardens, palisade. At Nancy's everything is overgrown, has become weeds, and whose hola. In the end, a delegation of neighbors gathered behind her, who demanded at least dry grass to remove. Otherwise, excuse me, it creates a fire hazardous situation. Nancy listened to them silently, standing behind the fence, and went into the house. They didn't understand. The grandmother understood what they told her. But then they saw the grass distorted. And in general, every year at least she didn't build mountains of garbage near the house. There were in Zorka, of course, and people not indifferent, who tried to help the strange neighbor. "Maybe the grandmother has some grief," said Molly, 18 years old, daughter of tractor driver Stepan, a young student who came from the city where she studied to be a doctor for the summer vacation. One can't live alone at all. Molly baked a cake with Nika's earth and went to visit Nancy. "Look at that," he laughed when he saw it. Jacob's grandfather was a shepherd whose craft was literally hereditary. His great-great-great-grandfather was still doing it. His son-in-law, however, did not want to become a shepherd, and disregarding the family heritage, after marrying one of Jacob's 3 daughters, became an electrician. They say that in America they go to the new neighbors with these cases. "What are you doing, Molly?" The American girl got off scot-free. Molly didn't take offense, and just as she wanted, she went to Nancy's house and knocked on the gate. Nancy did not immediately look out of the window and did not immediately come to the threshold. Apparently, she hoped the stranger would go away. But Molly was at that time stubborn and spunky, so she stood and smiled and waited patiently. At last Nancy came out, but did not open the wicket gate. From afar, by the way, there were people watching that wall. Molly and Nancy were talking about something. Molly was holding out a pie. The old woman was shaking her head. "Leave me alone." Suddenly Nancy shouted, "I don't need nobody." And the pie ruddy of soft dough, like fluff with a sea of strawberries, sweet as honey, flew to the ground window in the dust. The people watching the final looked at each other. If such a bright person as Molly could not find an approach to this Novoselka, it means that she will not take root in the village. And if she did, they would never consider her their own. And for the first time it seemed to be so. But what was the surprise of people when Molly, having come again to the village, now for winter vacation, again went to Nancy. "Life teaches her nothing," said Grandpa Jacob. Such a pie will go to waste again and again." Some of the villagers became spectators, and all expected a repetition of the sad scene. But suddenly Nancy opened the wicket and let Molly not only into the yard, but also into the house. It took Molly about 3 hours to come out of there. And naturally there were so many questions for her, but she refused to satisfy other people's curiosity. There are some people who have a difficult fate. No need to harass the girl, please. She's not a bad person. That's all we got from Molly. No interesting, scandalous details. No gossip, no details. All in all, it was a disappointment. For the curious, it's been that way ever since. When Molly came to visit her father, she had to visit her unloved neighbor. She was the only one Nancy would let in. Molly came to visit with hotels, and judging by the mountains, took out garbage. Each time she spared no hand, no back, putting someone else's house in order. The residents of Zori shook their heads. What a pure soul! And Molly grew up an orphan. Her mother drowned when she was 12. And since then, Molly became the head of the family, because her father drank with grief. The man would sometimes go to work, swear he wouldn't take another drop in his mouth. And then he'd relapse again. And not only he, as they call it, Molly had to look out for, but also a brother James 5 years younger than her, and a little sister Mashenka 7 years younger than her. Molly planned to get a job as a doctor here in her native village. In the city she lived, of course, in a dormitory, and unknown how she had time. But she worked part-time even in the city and sent money to her family. And without this material support, it was clear to everyone, the family would be completely destitute and would run away like that. Time flew. Molly, as she planned, returned to Zorka and became a paramedic, and continued to be the head of her complicated family. A day before the night before that night, when Nancy's world, after such a gray, monotonous, dreary, but still at least some quietly familiar world, turned over with the return of her grandson, Molly visited her. In general, she steadily visited the old lady neighbor at least once a week. She could have gone more often. Yes, Nancy's temper had deteriorated lately, and she was reluctant to open the door. "Oh, it's nice out." Molly smiled as she entered the house. It would be good to open the windows for fresh air, so she opened them, chasing out the dead, locked atmosphere. "I'm not empty-handed," she smiled again, lifting the bag from the store and unloading its contents. Some of it went into the cupboards, some into the old refrigerator that Nancy had inherited from the previous owners of the house. Gingerbread, red apples, and a dozen yogurts, sour cream, and cottage cheese. More chicken, canned cutlets, corn. A big piece of cheese. Molly knew that Nancy was extremely frugal with her pension. The old woman's health, despite her age, was amazingly good, so she didn't have to spend much on medicine. Sometimes it seemed to Molly that Nancy had such potential for life. Some young people have it, that there was something deep in her psyche, or maybe in her soul, that wouldn't let her use it. Nancy's grandmother walked hard, slowly, and with the mountains knocked down, as if an unbearable load bowed to the ground. Molly did not tire of reminding her neighbor about the need to eat well, but she stubbornly bought a minimum of pasta, bread and meat scraps, bones, and a little vegetables, potatoes and carrots. Molly could not get money from her grandmother to buy her normal food here, and had to sometimes with the seasoning of guilt, because from her family took away to buy supplies for her, though it is agreed, and in general the other, who would have thought that cunning old woman settled down, saves, sits as strangers feed her. But Molly, who had known Nancy over the years more than anyone else, could say that the situation here was not so clear-cut. And it's not Nancy's big goal to save $1 million from her pension. Not at all. It's just that it's as if she once set a different goal to lead a life as quietly as possible, discreetly denying herself everything. Dressing in new clothes, as if deprivation was her mandatory punishment for some sins of her youth, to the past. Nancy, Molly had naturally taken an interest over the years, but had learned little. And yet she had learned enough to raise 1,000 more questions. And if all of this became public knowledge, the people of Jorvik, it would certainly give rise to 1 million of the most incredible gossip stories. Here, for example, is a photo album. Sometimes they looked at it, but almost always in silence. Grandmother would just sit, looking at these pictures with her guest, running her fingers over some with arthritis scholarly fingers, and dropping only rarely a word. Among those pictures were black and white. And Molly guessed, this is a picture of the Nancy family, all dressed in the fashion of the 50s. An ordinary Soviet family. But the girls here, and they're clearly in their 70s. Nancy must be a student. There's a tall building in the background. Definitely a university of some kind. And here is exactly Nancy, only older than 30 years. She is wearing a snow-white dress. She is a bride. The photo was taken in a restaurant, obviously very expensive for its era. Both the people and the guests seemed to belong to the elite. Next to the groom stood another man, in appearance exactly his copy, only younger. And Molly, linking her assumptions to the words Nancy had dropped, realized that this was her husband's son, that is, her stepson. The photographs from a later time were amazing. Here Nancy had clearly been abroad. Paris, London, China, and America. Looks like they traveled a lot. And yes, Molly could have sworn at this point in her life Nancy was blossoming. She was happy, but not a single picture of her pregnant or with a toddler. Molly tried asking about Nancy's grandmother having children. But then, when she asked such a careless question, an almost scary thing happened. Nancy suddenly froze, then slammed the album shut. She threw it against the wall, and how she sobbed. She wailed that no, she was alone in the world. She was the damned soul. Don't touch her, please. Why did she have to go through this? Why did she lose everything and herself? Why didn't she just disappear? Molly was afraid then that Granny might have gone mad. But I calmed her down, gave her some heart drops, sat her down, and bit her warmly. Nancy fell into silence again, and Molly herself, almost weeping, apologized for coming in with tactless questions and promised that it wouldn't happen again. And she had kept her word. After all, she thought, apparently the old woman has no children of her own, and even if she did, they probably don't like her at all. So she lives lonely in the village. But also, of course, Happy and Molly's had thoughts that maybe there are children, grandchildren, and it is necessary to find them and call them to order. To say that they have moral obligations to an elderly relative, whatever the relationship is between them. But in the end, Molly didn't. And by what could be recognized through the photo album. The oddities of the mystery at Nancy were not limited. For example, there were quite a few books in French and English in her house, from which Molly made the assumption that Nancy had had a good profession in her youth. When Molly had laid out the groceries, she went over to Nancy, who was sitting looking out of the window. It's nice on the river. There's a fresh breeze blowing. In the woods, by the way, all the birds have arrived. They're singing well. Right? Nancy looked up at Molly with her pale blue eyes, which with age had acquired a strange, cloudy, transparent tint. She didn't answer. Molly moved around her house a bit, made sure there were clean linens in her grandmother's closet. Okay, she said in an exaggeratedly chipper and cheerful tone. Because there was really nothing to be happy about. I'm gonna go get some more, and I'll come back later. Okay. Don't miss me. Molly couldn't imagine how Nancy hadn't gone mad from loneliness. Maybe that's what she does with her books. She sits and reads, sometimes without her glasses. By the way, Nancy had perfect eyesight at her age. On the way home, Molly, as she often did, looked at the winding silver ribbons of the river. The views in the vicinity of the Zory were mesmerizing, and more than once Molly caught herself thinking that all this beauty is so invigorating, helps to distract from the anxieties of everyday life, relieves stress. In general, you don't need a therapist when you live in such a place. Her own house was getting closer, and as she approached it, Molly unconsciously slowed down. It wasn't that she didn't want to go back there, but being at home was getting harder and harder lately. In fact, Molly had nothing to reproach herself for. She did not abandon her little sister and father, did not go to the city in search of personal happiness and profit. When it was 18 and came back and helped brother James is quite big, left and went to study at vocational school. Decided to become an automobile mechanic. Mashenka, on the other hand, was just finishing school this year. Molly wrinkled his nose like a toothache. No, there's no way. To realize her sister's dream of a fancy dress for the prom, there are simply no such means. Even if Masha would believe it, not capricious, whining, and reproachful. However, Molly did not expect much gratitude from her relatives for the fact that they are largely used to take her care as something for granted it was already used to. But how hard it was sometimes. Sighing, Molly finally opened the door to her home. It was quiet, so her noisy, rowdy little sister was out with her friends. On their day off again, they probably went to the river from the kitchen. It is the main and large room, came the quiet grumbling of the radio. My father liked to listen to it, and for some reason he listened to it when he was drunk. Dad, have you had breakfast? I left potatoes in the pot, and there's still some baked chicken in the fridge, Molly said. She kicked off her shoes and put on her comfy slippers. Her father Dmitri sat at the table and looked into the glass. Him and the feces, and seemingly skimpy again, dropped Molly's tears, gritting her teeth, just as long as he didn't start remembering his mother. No, there was nothing wrong with the memories themselves, of course, but the bad thing was that after them, Dmitri usually suddenly decided to fix something in the household, and what he took on, he just broke. But there was nothing to be done. Molly had never been able to put her father to bed. Then he'd get even worse. Sighing, the girl went into her room, which she now shared with her grown sister. Molly froze in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. What is it? Wrinkles deep on her forehead. And she wasn't even 30 yet. And in general, the complexion is something, faded hair brittle. Today must be the day, Molly thought. It's that kind of day. Everyone's in a bad mood, and she's no exception. She examined herself meticulously, then resolutely turned away. Enough. Stop picking on her appearance. There's no money to be a beauty anyway, so I'll just have to live as I am. And in general, material things, as they say, are not the main thing. Nancy. Until evening, Malenko sat at the window, a little rustling around the house and still asleep. She was particularly immersed in herself, and there were special reasons for it. She hadn't said anything about it to anyone, not even Molly, who seemed to be the only one of the whole village who had been kind to her. It was just that Nancy had received a letter a few days ago, and knew who it was from, so would have burned it in the stove. But she opened the envelope trustingly. The letter was written by Charles. Charles is her grandson. He wrote that he was back. He didn't make it there. It didn't work out. He came home and realizes that they parted in a bad way, that they didn't communicate much at all. But there's nowhere else to go. He has absolutely nowhere else to go. So maybe his grandmother won't refuse him. Maybe she'd take him in for a while. Nancy sighed heavily. She'd hoped he'd stay there forever, or maybe he wouldn't find her. She would have liked that very much. The letter had been sent from the address of a neighbor who lived in the building where Nancy herself had once owned an apartment. She had sold it quickly, cheaply, and with that money. So she moved to the village. The picture of what had happened was clear. Charles, not finding her at that address, had apparently asked her neighbors to tell her where she now lived. Nancy sighed even more heavily, and it was her own fault. If she wanted to hide from everyone, she shouldn't have written to those neighbors. But they were kind-hearted people, and she, as Zorka settled in, she sent them a Happy New Year card for the first year. That's how her grandson found her. Nancy's gaze darted around the house, as if somewhere in its walls among the old things could be found the answers to the questions that held her. What answer? One might say, of course, that it was impossible for him to come, but Nancy was heavy with the main thing, and nearly howled with the rising feelings of beggar's stupefaction and committing guilt, because it was absolutely her fault that her grandson had grown up to be such a missing person, unable to get on with his life properly. Nancy decided that perhaps she would agree. Let him come. Maybe after all these years there's even a chance that things will get better. Of course, he can't remember everything that happened. He was too young, but she does. And maybe now they'll get along better. And not right away. Nancy's grandmother noticed a note at the end of the letter saying that he, Charles, actually planned to leave after sending the letter in a few days, because it was her natural kinship duty to receive him. When Nancy read the note at the end, she opened it, then closed it, and folded it carefully and put it in the envelope. There was nothing to be done about it then. Then so be it. The train would arrive at lunchtime the next day, and so Nancy expected her grandson to arrive with the evening bus. Nancy didn't go through the house and certainly didn't organize any treats. There was no energy or desire to do so. She just waited, waiting for the door to open and for him to come in. Charles knocked and entered. He simply stepped over the threshold and, without saying hello, froze. Nancy, breathless, stared at him. Here he was, her grandson. Here he was, the last person linking her to the past, a living reminder of what she had done, how stained about her conscience her soul. And back then, when everything had just begun, she had thought herself happy. A dabbler of fate, who happens to pick the ripest and sweetest fruits from its branches, except that no one warned her that the fruit was full of sweetness and poison. Nancy was from a simple family, in which, as they say, no one grabbed stars from the sky. But from her early youth, she dreamed of a very different life. That things, cosmetics abroad, that people not just respected for some labor achievements, but also recognized its exclusivity. Her parents, by the way, laughed good-naturedly at her daughter. They also said not to create confusion. Otherwise, life would show where she belonged. But Nancy didn't listen to anyone. And when in high school it turned out that she had a great aptitude for foreign languages, she decided what she wanted to become. She realized that a brilliant command of one or two languages could open desirable doors for her. And then it was said and done. Nancy enrolled in university and studied to become a translator. Naturally, closer to receiving her diploma, the student is the most capable among her classmates. She slowly acquired the right connections, and one day she was introduced to a man. His name was Mason, and he was a trader overseas, and it was a quirk of fate that he needed a translator. He needed a translator. One of Nancy's acquaintances joked that she had taken her chance like a piranha, and that she was afraid of her ambition. But again, Nancy didn't listen to anyone, and she really longed for much more than the ordinary circumstances of life were ready to offer her. Mason was unmarried when they met. He was a widower, a single father with a son already grown. And Nancy was young and sweet. She knew how to be affectionate, and soon they were married. It would seem that this was happiness, but it soon turned out that Nancy was barren. What a blow was that to her! "Don't be upset," her husband comforted her. "We already have a child." That was technically true. There was a stepson. But here, practically, Nancy began to feel that fate had laughed cruelly at her. Much later, looking back, she thought that it was for the reason that she couldn't be among herself that she had started treating him and his wife so badly, who were expecting the child that was to be Nancy's first grandchild. He was named Charles. Meanwhile, the world was changing. It was the 90s. Mason, adjusting to the new reality, went into business. And at first it seemed like he was a lucky man. He was winning big contracts. His family could afford to buy a house on the south coast of France. And then the black streak began. First, Mason, his son, and daughter-in-law were killed in a car accident. Charles was supposed to go with them that day. But the boy was cranky, and Mason refused to take him along as punishment. They were supposed to go to an amusement park in town after some errands. Nancy was left with an 8-year-old boy in her arms, and, as it soon turned out, a lot of debt. She was getting visits from the bank, and even worse, from some private individuals to whom Mason, as it turned out, owed astronomical sums. Nancy didn't know what to do. But then she found a way out. "There is someone who can help her," one of the creditors addressed her and explained something strange. "There is a person who can solve any problem, just absolutely any problem." "But I have no money, paintings, antique furniture," sighed Nancy. "It's all been described. It is usually not about such a small thing as some money of human civilization. Money is, just energy," said the strange creditor and handed over a business card. Black paper with a silver color. The text on it read Master A. Black and depicted 2 dots, which for some reason caused Nancy to make a sharp, uncomfortable, and almost painful association with the eyes of a beast glaring in the darkness. But what was there to do? She telephoned her. A secretary answered and said that Nancy could come in and Mr. A. Black would see her too. As Nancy realized, an audience with this man was terribly difficult to get. But thanks to the business card, as an individual invitation, by acquaintance everything became possible. The mysterious A. Black did not seem at first sight to be an ordinary man of simple Adam. He was a man of about 50 years old with a bald head, a potbelly, and even uneven yellowish teeth. In general, he did not look like a powerful millionaire who could own a mansion, or rather even a whole castle, where she came with her grandson. Those were the terms of the audience. But once this man began to move, to speak, it was like a flash of magnetism, of charisma, of inner pictorial power. Noah Black was a brilliant orator, a psychologist and manipulator. But Nancy did not realize this for a long time. He sympathized with her losses and said that she was left not only debts and nightmares, but also numerous business connections of her deceased husband. And that's worth a lot. "I think a child should not be surprised by the business talk of adults," Noah said. When the older boy Charles entered the office, he was a pretty blond boy with glasses. Noah introduced him as his son Hector and suggested that the children could go and play in the garden, where a table with all sorts of goodies had already been set up for them. The conversation flowed on, and much later, looking back, Nancy reflected that it was very strange, as if hypnotized. He was talking, saying he would help, that she would be all right, and she'd agreed and even cried in his office with gratitude and relief. There was a savior for her after all. Then Nancy left with Charles and a substantial amount of cash. Mr. Black said it would take him some time to address her questions and concerns, and then the truth about the price came out. It just so happened that Charles had stayed overnight at the castle several times at Mr. Black's invitation, and I'm sorry, it didn't occur to her that that was a little odd. Her reasoning was this: Mr. Black is just a very kind-hearted man, and his son has his own mini-zoo, carousel, all kinds of fun. And my grandson has become his friend. So what's wrong with boys socializing more? But no matter how much Nancy wanted to distance herself from her grandson, to whom, by the way, she had no warm feelings, but she could not help noticing the changes in Charles's behavior. He suddenly became withdrawn, silent. He didn't eat well, and at night he woke up with nightmares. He sometimes threw tantrums, saying he would never return to Black Manor. And then, with the resignation of doom, led to the slaughter of a victim, he would go there. Nancy was getting help. True, her affairs were still bad, but Black had promised that things would be better soon. And Nancy preferred to turn a blind eye to Charles' strange visits to other people's homes. Then someday Noah said it would be good for me to get away, and paid for her vacation in the Swiss Alps. And naturally, he said, the boy could and should, just absolutely should, stay with him. Don't, said Charles quietly, when she announced her plans to him. I don't want to, yes, said Nancy. And I thought you and Hitler were friends. I don't know, Charles frowned. He's protective of me, but they're taking me and the other kids anyway. That Nancy didn't understand what he meant. What other kids? Who are they? Where are they taking them? Charles, speaking gravely, as if he had to break some barrier to do so, told her that there were other children on the estate, only no one could see them, and that they were being treated there. And they teach them weird stuff, and that some evil scientists come to them. Are you stupid? Nancy shouted at him. When Charles got to the part of the story where Mr. Black, dressed up as a black goat, beat a drum and demanded that his son strike a man tied to a stone altar with a sword. Don't you dare make that up. Noel helped us. You'd be in an orphanage and I'd be homeless if it weren't for him. You disgusting, ungrateful little boy. Shut your lying mouth and listen, you little shit. At the last words, Nancy slapped Charles across the face, so hard that he fell to the carpet. Crying, the boy looked up at her and wow, that look on Nancy's face gave him a chill. I'm sorry, you've been a stepmother to my father and me nobody. But I'm a little boy and I'll obey. Suddenly he called her that word which, like a wall of ice, had been erected between them. Charles had hitherto addressed her by her first name. Her grandmother had never called her by it. Nancy didn't want to, because it supposedly gave away her age. But never before had Charles mentioned that she was his father's stepmother. Nancy did go to the resort and had a wonderful time. But she tried to have a wonderful time without thinking about how her obnoxious grandson was doing. And then suddenly the police showed up at the resort and said the dreaded thing. And when Nancy opened the newspapers and turned on the TV, there was a story about it too. Turns out that Noah Black had been arrested. It turned out that he was leading some sort of all-who, which included many wealthy, powerful people, through mystical rituals. Noah pledged to ensure their prosperity and all success, to protect their businesses. But as the authorities said, in reality he was only a skillful manipulator and even hypnotist. He extracted money from the members of the sect and did all sorts of abominations, even involving children, from whom he seemed to want to create some perfect weapon for the future. Now Noah had been captured, his accounts frozen, and all his property seized. All in all, it became clear to Nancy that she had lost her powerful patron. What about my grandson? She asked, afraid of hearing the worst. Black intended to poison him, one of the detectives said. As well as his own son, a second detective added. Nancy was told that Charles was now in hospital, his life no longer in danger. His health, on the other hand. Doctors gave predictions that the boy would continue to have partial amnesia due to the substance he had taken. About the last few months he had been at Black Manor, and that he would have heart, liver, or rubber band problems for life. In short, Charles had become, as the saying goes, without 5 minutes an invalid. Nancy was in shock, and she was also afraid of accusations because her grandson suspected something. He told such things, and she ignored him. And so Nancy was greatly relieved when she learned that Charles had indeed forgotten everything. What did he remember? Well, he had only spoken on the subject of his stay on the estate to the police, and he had refused to talk to her. In fact, he'd been cold and distant with her. But he did seem to be recovering from what had happened. Nancy had lost everything, and she realized it was time to go back. Leave France. Her own parents had died by this time, and all she had left was their apartment in an old brick 9-story building. Nancy simply had no idea how to live now, or rather survive, when she had lost everything she was used to, and when she had a grandson in her arms, to whom she recognized with surprise, and even some disgust at herself. She still felt nothing, even felt sorry for the kid, purely humanly. But there were no warm, kindred feelings. But then it suddenly turned out that Mason had some relatives in Russia, and his son's wife had relatives. And so they asked if Nancy would agree to give Zhenka to one of them for upbringing. Nancy gladly agreed. Let them take it. She'd done enough already. And at the same time, as it was still bitter to realize, she had broken the life of a child. The relatives, by the way, knew next to nothing about what had happened. Nancy imagined that Charles had not fallen victim to the sectarians, that he was all right, and the boy himself kept silent about everything. Years passed. Nancy tried to lead a normal life. She worked a little as a translator, a French tutor, and it was strange. But it was as if Black's curse had come true. I can assure you that the adepts who left him will be eternally unsuccessful. Nancy, barely scraping together enough money to live a more or less bearable life. Personal life did not add up, and with each passing year strengthened the feeling that there, in France, she left not only her conscience. After all, she, in fact, closed her eyes to everything that was happening, but also a part of her soul. And now what? She is forever damned. Time flew by with scant tidings. Nancy was learning that Charles was not living well. He was a two-bit bully. He was said to have become mentally retarded in general. Then he sort of pulled through and went to technical school to become a builder. Then he dropped out of school and got drunk. Then he was working somewhere and leaving home. There were other rumors about Charles growing up unloved, aggressive, not getting along with people. Nancy tried to keep from herself the idea that it was because of her that he had become like that. After all, we all know how hard childhood traumas can be to deal with. Sometimes, by the way, Charles wrote her letters or even called her, congratulating her on holidays, and it was eerily strange, because he had never spoken a single word about what had happened in his childhood, and Nancy naturally did not endeavor to remind him of it. The flight was in Rome. At some point, Nancy was told something startling. Charles had been lucky enough to get a job abroad. He'd gone to France as a crop picker. But soon the sad news came from there. Charles almost went to prison in France because, it seems, he had done something to annoy his employer. And now he was back, and for some reason not with her. Nancy supposed that after all the past, Charles had probably been turned away by acquaintances and relatives. Still, it was unclear why he had decided to visit her, but it was also hard for Nancy to think. She had been adrift for the last few years, and now more than ever she felt guilty about her grandson, and felt she had no right to refuse him. Really, it wouldn't do her any harm if he repaid her a little, and also maybe will feel better at heart, and maybe her hospitality would count for something in the next world. And so Charles sat opposite his grandmother at the table. They had dinner, a silent dinner. And before that, of course, they had a little talk over tea. Charles said that, yes, he had made a mistake in France, but he wanted to start again. He was thinking of starting a business, his own. His father had one, and he was successful. So why shouldn't he? Your father's business ended badly, Nancy said. I didn't really expect her to be so harsh herself. But she said it. Then she put her grandson on the sofa and went to bed. Nancy called Charles to her about an hour later, after they had gone to bed, and sat down on the sofa. He lay down with his clothes on. By the way, are you asleep? I'm awake. Did you wake me? Nancy answered quietly. What do you want? I need money. Charles said muffled. And you've always been thrifty. Say, have you saved up? Nancy pressed her lips together and turned her back to the wall. Oh, she did not like this conversation. What more could a man want? After you've taken him in? I have no money, she said, and she was on fire. Maybe sleep will come sooner. And you sleep, grandson. Stay 3 days, as agreed, and then. Granson in pitch darkness only slightly diluted by the light of the moon outside the window. Charles' voice sounded somehow like the hiss of a snake. Granson. Do you have the right to call me Granson? Oh, old girl, you've learned nothing from life. Nancy. I heard Charles get up and walk around the house. Have you been drinking? Quietly asked the old woman, smelling the thick odor of alcohol. She had always been sensitive to such things. She never kept anything alcoholic at home, by the way. What's it to you? Mumbled Charles, who for some reason Gromyko paid with a towel, a cupboard. He had indeed been drinking. The bottle was hidden in his traveling bag, and he emptied it secretly when he went to bed. It was already hard to sleep without it lately. Nancy hoped her grandson would calm down. She had honestly told him there was no money. Yeah, there wasn't much in savings. That's just the way it was. She was saving for her funeral. But Charles wouldn't settle down. And as Nancy kept quiet about where he kept the money, he got angrier and angrier. You'll die soon, old girl, through gritted teeth. Where are you going to buy it? At some point, Nancy got out of bed and walked over to Charles and gently touched him on the shoulder. Granson, wake up. I don't have what you're looking for. Look at me. Do I live like a rich man? No money? No. I'm sorry, Granson. Tears were rolling from the old woman's eyes. I let you down badly once. But now you've come to me. You came to me. And that means we're your kin, the closest people. I'm your man. So why are you doing this, Charles? Jaws. Close the old one, Charles. Throws off his hand in disgust. You think I've forgotten everything. You think I don't remember you selling me out, just so you could get money. Nancy staggered and collapsed to the floor, not because he'd shouted, but because her legs were suddenly weak. Charles threw her backwards with his words. Do you know what it was like for me? No, you never asked me, never once asked me what I was like because you never cared about me. And what do I expect from you? He grinned bitterly and angrily at the same time. I'm not your kin. Why are you apologizing now? You know, Charles looked at me with wild eyes. You could hardly understand his speech. What happened to me? You don't talk, old girl. You don't have any money, do you? Well, nothing. It's nothing. I'm telling you now how they made me talk about everything they wanted. What are you talking about, Granson? Nancy looked at Charles with eyes widened with horror. She was suddenly very frightened, and she thought of, oh, well, let him have those pennies. What have you saved up? Except that right now Nancy could not remember where she had kept them. Wiped it out of her memory, knocked it out. Out of fear, I suppose, she thought. Charles, meanwhile, without listening to her weak protests and sobs, grabbed her by the scruff of the neck and dragged her into the yard. He knew what he had to do. The sun was rising over Zorka. Molly reluctantly opened her eyes. She used to love mornings, but now she didn't, because every morning it's new worries, problems you have to solve. There's no work to do again. In principle, Molly has never regretted that she chose the path of a doctor. But it's just that she is so tired lately, who has been working for a year without vacation. That is purely formally on vacation, went on vacation, but there was no time for herself. All the cases and worries absorbed. Having overcome the temptation to lie down for another 5 minutes, Molly got up, shot the bed, went to Poe, brushed her teeth, and washed her face. Dad, as usual, fell asleep right on the kitchen floor. As of late, Molly had stopped carrying him on her back to bed. It's just a bad back and no thanks. Then Molly's little sister peeked in on her. She was fast asleep. That's Sonia, Molly sighed. Her sister liked to stay up late surfing the internet, and unless she had to go to school, she'd get up in the afternoon. With a sigh, Molly stood at the stove. I cooked breakfast for myself and my relatives. Of course, I couldn't leave them hungry. Then she started to pack. She had to go to work. Hello, lion cub, her grandfather Jacob greeted her. The fence of his property and adjoined to Molly's yard. What do you think of him? About who? The girl did not understand the great-grandson Nancy. Does she have a grandson? Molly was surprised. Otherwise, with great pleasure from his own person, who was the first to know everything, nodded Jacob. In the evening, then, late, I was coming home from the pasture. Then my Mirka the goat, you see, went to the night grazing unauthorized. But I was looking for her, bringing her home. And I saw a man standing at the Nancy gate, just like a criminal. And I stopped and asked him, "Who are you?" And he says to me, "What do you mean? He's her grandson." But that's just the way it is. This came as a shock to Molly, because Nancy had never said a word about such a relative before. Molly sighed before going to work. Now she had to visit Nancy's grandmother, Nancy. Molly called out to her neighbor to stand outside the gate for the umpteenth time. No. In general, it happened that she was silent and stayed at home, not giving, as they say, signs of existence. But right now, something Molly did not give rest. So, sighing, she tried to push. The wicket door, as always, was unlocked on the hook. It had been a long time since Nancy had stopped locking the yard. Said there was nothing to steal in the yard anyway. "Grandma Nancy, are you home?" "It's Molly." The girl knocked on the window and peered through the glass and curtains, and immediately frowned. The sun was shining so you couldn't see very well, but it looked like a terrible mess inside. "Nancy is Molly." She walked around the house, climbed up on the porch, and knocked firmly on the door. If her grandson had come to visit, then at least he should open the door. And then Molly noticed that the front door was unlocked. And that was strange, because Nancy was used to closing it with a bad feeling. Molly pushed the door open and stepped into the hall. The distinctive odor of booze immediately hit her nose. His Molly over the years, while she struggled fruitlessly with alcoholism. She had learned to recognize her father instantly. After a moment, the source of the odor was revealed. The man sprawled on the floor. Molly, eyes rounded. He made such a mess in here. He turned everything upside down, broke dishes, threw photos and things. She was seething with muffled irritation. She'd known such rowdies. In fact, 5 years ago, when my father had gotten drunk, he'd gotten violent. He'd only recently started acting differently. Drunk, he'd get quiet and only occasionally get violent. But it wasn't the state of the house that worried Molly most. It was the absence of Nancy's grandmother. "Hey you," leaning over, she poked the stranger in the shoulder with her palm. "And waking up, where's Grandma Nancy?" But the man didn't wake up, only scratched God some more and stiffened even more furtively, letting out a string of saliva from his mouth. Disgusting. Molly expressed her opinion aloud and walked briskly through the house. It was small, there was nowhere to hide. And why would a monkey hide? Unless it was a drunken grandson. "Why did you let him in?" Molly sighed. She had already looked in the closet just in case, and even in the cellar, but the gatehouse was nowhere to be found. Sighing even more heavily, Molly went out into the yard and started calling the old woman again. "What's the matter?" Jacob looked out from the fence leading to the abandoned vegetable garden. Molly summarized the situation as follows. "Maybe it was singing in the barn." Jacob scratched the back of his head. "When I was a kid and my father was drinking in the barn, I saved myself and my mother. I remember, all shut up and sit quiet as mice. I never found it." "Maybe," replied Molly and walked towards the barn. It was basically an abandoned outhouse, ready to collapse into boards and rubble at any moment. Entering the cool gloom of the barn, Molly looked around confused. Where would an elderly person hide in here? She was about to go out, but then she heard a strange sound. Molly froze and listened. Was it just me? But then the quiet sound came again. It was an agony-filled moan. It was coming from the side and muffled, as if from behind a barrier. "Grandma Nancy," Alina called with a hysterical note in her voice. Oh, how she did not like everything that was happening. Molly looked around, not realizing where the sound was coming from, and that her gaze fell on a low chest, or rather a box. It wasn't very big at all, and it was piled with all sorts of junk. and though it was so creepy, Molly could have sworn it was where the sound was coming from. You found it somehow. Jacob looked into the shed and explained I was trespassing on her garden. Trespassing, so to speak. Grandpa Jacob Molly, almost crying, poked her finger in the direction of the box. You're aghast, exhaled Jacob, as the junk from the drawer was thrown off and the lid was flung open. Molly, on the other hand, just shrieked in horror because they're from the hook. So much so that it seemed to be halved in size. There lay Nancy's grandmother, but she was alive. Pale blue eyes and climbing over to the unwanted rescuers, frantically praying, disbelieving. Slowly, without haste, she was carefully dragged outside. The old woman's arms and legs clearly caught, barely chased, after hours in cramped quarters, but she didn't cry out in pain. Only a body scream. Quietly does sighed often, and Marguerite. Nancy's grandmother is sweet, but it's almost all right now, Molly said to her. And she herself was almost crying too, and she was holding on solely because she had awakened in her all the skills of a paramedic, suitable for a particular situation. And so, naturally, it was necessary not to cry, but to help the person. Ambulance. Call an ambulance. Molly threw to Grandpa Jacob. I have a phone, but I don't carry it with me, he replied guiltily. It's at home. Molly began to look for it. It should be here in her purse, but she must have forgotten it too. She smacked herself on the forehead, remembering that she had indeed forgotten it on the kitchen table when she had been watching an entertainment video with funny kittens over tea and sandwiches. I dashed across the yard to the gate, and just a minute before, an expensive black luxury SUV with tinted windows had pulled up to the gate of the poorest Grandma Nancy's house in the village. And Molly, as it happened, literally ran into one of the two people who got out of it. Oops, took a chance. And because she was all on edge and was in a hurry, running, she almost fell. But she was picked up by strong arms and held upright. Molly, instinctively resting her palms on the man's broad chest, hidden under a black leather braid, dropped her gaze, and a little later, looking back, she never realized what it was. But it was a state that fit the description of drowning in someone else's eyes. The stranger's eyes were brown, deep, and piercing. It was like he was looking straight into your soul. He was about 30 years old, with strong, sharp, masculine features, a nose with a slight Gorbenko, black to the middle of the neck, curly hair, bronze golden skin. He smelled some perfume reminiscent of leathery wood, and something pleasant. He closed a gentle embrace before she would have said let go, and a slight smile touched his lips, but his gaze was completely serious and even stern. I'm still Nancy. This is her house after all. She, Molly, almost gasped at this contrast as fear, anger, and panic returned after the singing relaxation in his hands. Nancy's grandmother is in trouble. We need to call an ambulance. Do you have a phone? The girl blurted out. What's wrong? The stranger's tone, and he changed all by himself. Now it was a man of action, to whom you could entrust all your troubles and problems, not doubting that he would solve them masterfully. Grandpa Jacob Molly flew back into the yard. The stranger and his shaven-headed companion entered behind her, closeted in a business suit. Breathing heavily, the old man replied, squatting beside the laid-back Nancy. Molly, confused, explained that there was no need to wait for an ambulance. This man is taking them to the hospital now. Who is it? Jacob asked with a squint. He considered himself a broad-minded man, but somehow he could not imagine that Nancy had any such acquaintances, and besides, he didn't like the curly-haired brunette very much. I am an old acquaintance of Nancy, answered the strange stranger in Russian, but with a strong accent, from which Grandpa Jacob realized that he was a foreigner, probably from somewhere in Europe, and realized, Grandpa Jacob, this because in his youth he was a long-distance sailor and saw the whole world. What are you talking about? Molly waved his hands. Hurry up. The mysterious brunette picked up the old woman in his arms gently, carefully, and carried her to the car. "Get in the back seat with her," he commanded Molly, and she, nodding, was the first to get into the car. The two men got in front, and the car started. It drove quickly down the road from the village to the district center, where there was a hospital. Jacob remained standing outside the gate. He scratched the back of his head, hummed, and spat on the ground. So much for the story. And then he walked. No, almost ran to the neighbors. There, already peering out from the fence across the street to tell them what had happened, and the fact that Nancy's grandmother didn't get into the box by herself and somewhere nearby. So there must be a bad person who did this to her. Jacob let it all go completely unnoticed. It was only when the neighbors, the excited flock he was telling everything to, asked him who was this subhuman. What did Nancy's grandmother hurt him? It was only then that he remembered what it must be. In general, that the first thing to ask is her grandson. "When are we going to you?" exclaimed Andre. Tough guy. The son from them. And the neighbors. "We must catch him and make him answer, 'Let's go.'" Another of the neighbors supported him. And the men rushed to the Nancy house. There they found a mess. Same smell of booze. They didn't find Charles. He'd vanished. Charles decided to teach the old woman a lesson that night and did what he did. He went back to the house and took another bottle out of his bag and started drinking. Ha! Let the cunt know how he felt. Charles thought that in half an hour he would go and get his grandmother out of the box, or she would die there. He thought he'd get her out, and then she'd tell him where she kept the money. Maybe she wouldn't. Fuck her, at least tell him about her. Let the bitch suffer. She's been riding on someone else's coattails all her life. Charles greedily gulped down the heady drink sitting on the floor. How he hated his life. And whose fault was that? Nancy. She thought he'd forgotten everything. Everyone thought he'd forgotten everything. But he wasn't. Not at all. Charles knew what had happened to him. And it was carved into his brain, burned into his memory with a hot iron. And it would haunt him for the rest of his life. He remembered begging his grandmother not to give him to those people. But she laughed, called him a spoiled, naughty boy, and took him there. And what could he, a little boy, do? He couldn't go to the French police. No, that's what he wanted to do at first. But Mr. Black and his henchmen explained to their little victim, very lucidly, that they had a lot of money and even more connections, and no one would believe him. And for causing them trouble, he would be punished in such a way. And to be smart, he'd even been shown once what punishment was for those who disobeyed Mr. Black. But the doctors were right about something. Many of the details of his nightmares at the manor had indeed evaporated from Charles's memory. But he still remembered too much. He remembered the pills he and Hector had been forced to take. Why? Well, they were told it was for the mind. He remembered how they and other children were taken into a dark room and putting something on their heads, forced to watch strange movies with no plot and a lot of pictures and short scenes. He remembered being made to repeat aloud some numbers and being shown strange black and white blotches. They were told, looking at them, to name the first thing that came into their heads later. After such a study, Mr. Black, as little Charles understood then, explained to each of the boys that it was all part of a big project, and they would become real stars, heroes, and celebrities if they went through it to the end. After these sessions, which were conducted by some people in white coats, the kids were fed hearty, delicious gifts, and then let go home. Why is he doing all this? Charles asked Hector once, when the boys, walking in the garden, stopped by the pond and rose. Does he really want to save the world? No, answered Hector. He wants to save himself. I feel sick, Charles admitted. I don't want to watch or listen to anything anymore. You are weak. Hector looked at him very carefully. You shouldn't be like that. You're small. You don't understand anything yet. But it's science. I don't need this science, Charles exclaimed, and kicked him with his foot. I don't want it. Good. Hector smiled and patted his buddy on the shoulder. I'll talk to your father so he won't torture you too much. And that was surprising. But after that conversation, Charles had indeed been treated a little more gently But he was still scared and uncomfortable and disgusted. Charles remembered something else. What had happened shortly before it was all over, Mr. Black's estate. The police had broken in. Charles thought then, by the way, that perhaps he hadn't been able to bribe everyone. And he would have been glad. But he hardly had the strength to rejoice anymore. He was completely exhausted by this strange science. And just before the day of his release, Mr. Black gathered his guests. There was a big reception at the estate. And there were children. Not all of them, but just a few, including Charles. Then, when the reception was over for the night, almost all the guests left. Those who remained, however, dressed in black scarlet robes and went down to the basement. Oh, how Charles dreaded this place. He had been told by the other boys that it was a veritable medieval catacomb, haunted by reanimated skeletons, giant rats, and ghosts. Charles remembered the events of that night in fragments. The flames of hundreds, maybe 1,000 candles burned. The walls of the dungeon echo with the hum of voices singing in a foreign language, and Charles knows it's Latin. A stone altar, a statue of something, a creature. It looks like a goat and a man at the same time. He remembered being held by the shoulders and told to look and fear nothing. He remembered Mr. Black announcing that of all the students his son was the best Hector, handing him a weapon and telling him to walk up to the altar and punish the man who had plotted to betray his father. "No, don't do it," whispered Charles, whose heart was just churning. If Hector obeyed the order, he would break. Something in him would change forever, and he would lose the friend he had made in this strange and frightening place. And then he can't take it all. Charles suddenly burst out and rushed into one of the dark corridors. He ran and cried, and then he tripped and fell. He lay down on the cold, damp stone and roared heartily. He didn't care if he was punished. What the proof in the darkness, what they would whip him with the whip. He did not care anymore. But he was only carried out of the dungeon and given some bitter herbal tea, after which he fell into a deep sleep. The next morning everyone behaved as if nothing had happened. Charles had breakfast brought to his room. As usual, scones with jam, whipped cream, honey dippings, delicious wheat porridge, and orange juice. Hector looked in and told him that they had put a new swing in the garden and that he was waiting for him there. All in all, it seemed as if nothing had happened yesterday. Only Charles felt as if he had a spring inside him that had been compressed to the limit and was about to spread. And so he didn't eat breakfast, sneaking through the corridors of the house to Mr. Black's study. Charles realized perfectly well that he was just a boy, and he was not up to the task of dealing with this powerful evil. But he also knew there was something he could do. And so he did, gently, as if it could bite him. He opened the silver box that stood on the master's desk. There, on a scarlet velvet backing, lay a ring of black silver with a fancy relief pattern. Charles had taken it by the sea into his life. He imagined what they would do to him if they caught him in the act. But no one entered the study suddenly. Charles closed the box and tucked the handkerchief into his pocket. He was young, but he liked to read detective books for children and had learned about such things as fingerprints. So he opened the door to the study and the box with a linen handkerchief. It looked like the ring was in his father's pocket. Charles jumped out through the open door onto the veranda and down into the garden. He looked around and breathed a sigh of relief. No one seemed to have seen him. In the garden, Charles went to the clean old oak tree and there dropped the ring into the confusedly deep and unpleasant-looking hole. Done. And then Charles sprinted to the swing, and he and Mason played gloriously until lunchtime. And then men burst into the manor house, and it was as if all was over. Mr. Black was arrested, and the boys, including Charles, were released. Later, while he was in the clinic, he asked a detective, "What about Hector?" "He's fine." He said the boy was fine. He's been handed over to his father's distant relatives, who will take care of him now. But no, the boys can't see each other because each of them is an important witness in this whole giant nightmare case, and so they must be separated for their own safety. And then Then Charles was talked to by detectives, psychologists, and he felt utterly useless because Charles himself could remember so little. He suspected that the disappearance of clear memories, such as the faces of Mr. Black's guests, had something to do with that bitter herbal tea. Then his grandmother had taken him away, and he had submitted. What else could he do? Charles was in a strangely devastating state of indifference, and he somehow didn't care where he was or what was happening to him. Back with his grandmother, then life with a new family. And oh, it wasn't a good life. No, Charles didn't mean to be a naughty boy on purpose. He just felt like an outsider and spoiled. He couldn't help how often he had mood swings and punishing outbursts of anger in which he could start smashing everything around him. Time flew by. Charles grew up, but it was as if he did not live, but lived the time allotted in this world, not feeling the very taste of life. He had no idea what he wanted to do in life. It didn't matter. He only realized that he had to do something to earn money, because without it he would be completely lost. He tried to start a relationship with the opposite sex, because as everyone around him said, it was the right thing to do. But it didn't work out. He felt nothing for these women, and they left him easily. "You seem like a good man," the last of them, Lisa told him. "But you're like an empty person inside. Is there something keeping you from living? Sort yourself out and be happy." Only Charles didn't understand. How do you figure it out? He didn't have any friends either, just acquaintances, but they weren't very nice. And even sometimes they left him too, saying that it was physically hard to be near him. "You have bad energy," said one of the friends who left. "Must be the weight of the past weighing you down, huh? You need to figure it out and let it go." And time flew by, and Charles never really got anywhere. And then things got worse in his life than ever. And it all started with the fact that in the place where he worked, unpacking all sorts of household chemicals, the men started talking about the fact that abroad in the season you can earn good money as a harvester. The main thing is to be in good health, and no bad habits or lines. "Charles, come with me," said to him one man. His name was Sergi. "There's an ad for olive picking in France, but it's a bit scary to go alone, you know." Charles thought for a moment. France. That's where it all happened. And then something inside him just clicked. And he remembered that while his adoptive parents were dragging him to psychologists and psychiatrists, one of them had given the advice that sometimes it helps to return to the place where the experience was received to get rid of traumatic common experiences. So Charles agreed, and a few months later, together with Sergi, they traveled by bus to France, because air travel was too expensive, and as if there was an elaborate mockery of fate in it all. But it turned out that the farmland where they were to work was not far from where Mr. Black's estate was located. "Why are you so gloomy?" Sergi asked him one day. "It's like I've come to hell." Laughter. "Say, friend, let's go out. Let's have some fun. Let's meet a French woman." But the only thing Charles met was alcohol. It was in France that he first drank just a glass of red at dinner. But after 2 weeks, Charles was guzzling alcohol in such a way that he was directly hinted a little more and would be kicked out. Not a penny would not pay, and they would make him pay fines. But he didn't care. Charles lost sleep and peace. Memories, buried, seemed to be bursting out. Insistent noses were prying. And one night Charles, having had a drink, tentatively set out for Black's estate. He didn't know himself why he had to go there. There was just such a need that he was unable to resist. Charles already knew that no one had lived in the manor for many years, but it must have been guarded. But apparently it was poorly guarded, because Charles found a hole in the fence and entered the garden. His feet carried him. He reached that very oak tree, not noticing how his fingers were scraped, splinters planted in them. He climbed into the crevices, but behind the ring glittered dimly in the ghostly light, peeking out from behind the clouds and the moon. Charles slipped it into his pockets and made his way out of the garden as well. He returned on foot to the farmer's property. He quietly made his way to the dormitory house where the laborers lived and went to bed. He did get fired, by the way, but they paid him a little. It was Sergei Poe who made the trouble, and Charles left France. He had the ring with him. And it was strange as hell, but it seemed to be getting easier now, and at the same time it was getting worse. The memories were more painful than ever. Charles, back home, had gone to visit his foster parents and had gotten so drunk that he had gotten into a fight with his foster father. He left home, spent the night at some distant acquaintances, and then literally found himself on the street. Where to go? The only way out was to the homeless, because there was no more strength to live like that. When there was no strength and everything was like that. In a fog. But his foster parents forgave him, found him and dragged him by force to their house. Then to sleep. They fed him, persuaded Charles to code him. And he agreed. We decided to do it through hypnosis. Is that your decision? The doctor asked Charles sternly. You must realize the seriousness of this choice and the probable consequences of what can happen if you snapped and drink alcohol. Come on already, sighed Charles. I know all that, but I can't take it anymore. It's like I'm not alive. The hypnosis session took place. A very strange patient, the hypnotist later said thoughtfully to his fellow assistant. It's as if his mind has been tampered with before, although he claims it never happened. It's a very strange case. After being quoted, Charles seemed to get better. But he also realized he was definitely a stranger to the people who raised him. Now Charles just wanted to leave soon and start his own separate life. But he also realized he needed to meet someone, his grandmother. In general, he wanted to really stay with her for a couple of days and talk about everything quietly, as they say, and then move on, get a job, as long as they helped with housing, and then whatever life throws at you. But something went wrong on the train. It was that Charles had a very persistent fellow traveler. Don't you respect me? He asked, drinking his eyes and pushing Charles a shot glass. I've been quoted by a hypnotist. Writing. Shook his head at the interlocutor. I was quoted too. So, do you know? No. Charles looked at the alcohol and felt the urge to knock back a shot. There seemed to be a fire blazing right from the inside, and he had to douse it right away. His traveling companion told him that he was also copied by his ex-wife, but he was a free man, so he drank and lived better. It was hard to agree with him. He looked wrinkled and obviously sick, but Charles suddenly decided maybe a couple of drops would do the trick. And then, he's got that willpower of hers. He'd just have a drink to get acquainted, and that'd be it. And it was on. The traveler got off at one of the stations, and Charles stayed and bought more alcohol. His head was buzzing, humming and spinning with such thoughts, angry and offensive at the same time. Arriving at Nancy's, Charles no longer wanted to have a calm and heart-to-heart talk. He could barely keep himself from saying to the old woman's face everything he thought about how she had ruined his life. And then Charles suddenly thought that his grandmother must have money. Couldn't help but save up, because she'd always been so greedy. And there it was. And she didn't spare her grandson. Sold him, in fact. Then Charles drank some more, and it all went completely to his head. How much he hated Nancy. He was angry that she wouldn't tell him where the money was. So then he decided to teach her a lesson. Then he really wanted to let her out, but then he fell asleep unnoticed. In the morning, Charles slowly began to come to his senses as he was being shaken and scolded by some strange damsel. She was so beautiful. Just looking at her made him feel so unbearably ashamed of everything he had done. Then she left. Charles, when he realized that it had long since dawned and remembered where he had left Nancy, was horrified, jumped up, wanted to run and save her, but suddenly saw a car outside the gate, and then people came out of it. And yes, it was very strange, but only Charles, looking out the window, suddenly clearly recognized the face of that man with black hair. And even though it had been so many years, he recognized him. It was him. Charles, how had fear clung to the floor. No, The feeling that announced it was completely different. It was primal terror, and somehow also the realization that if this man knew he was here, his life would never be the same again. And then Charles saw the man carrying his grandmother in his arms, and he wanted to rush to them, but he couldn't. Instead, when he realized that everyone had left, he quietly grabbed his things, left the house, and rushed away from the village. In the hospital, Molly did not leave Nancy's grandmother as far as possible. The doctor who was treating the elderly patient even had to shout at Molly, saying that her fussing only prevented him from doing his work. "Excuse me." Molly obediently went to the far end of the corridor, where there were free seats for visitors, and nosed down on the metal table. "Don't worry about the bill. I'll pay it all," the brunette said. "We have free medicine," Molly replied, rubbing her nose with a paper handkerchief. Still, he smiled with a touch of encouragement. Surely she would need some additional care after the first aid was administered, and something else might be needed here. "Here you go." With those words, he held out money to her. A lot of money. Molly took it reluctantly. It was for Nancy. Though it was astonishing that suddenly she had such an acquaintance. It was about time, wasn't it? "Thank you," he mumbled. How awful. How could he do this to her? "Who?" asked the brunette grandson of her. Molly sighed. Surely he must be no one else. "Arrived last night." That's how she didn't notice the shadow sliding across the brunette's face. "I'll step back for a moment," he said. The swarthy man stepped out onto the hospital porch, walked to the SUV his assistant was waiting for him at the wheel, and briefly informed him that apparently it was time for the private investigator to be replaced. He notified that Charles had taken a ticket to a completely different station, but did not mention that he had gotten in earlier. None of these people knew that Charles had done so, because he was still hesitating at the station, whether to stop at Grandma Dina's or to go straight on to the town where, as some acquaintances had suggested, they needed laborers for some construction project. So how would he know that, boss? The aide waved his hands. "He doesn't seem to have as many informants as, say, at home. So I guess he's doing his job all right. We're the lucky ones. You were just going to meet Nancy and find out more about Charles, and then go after him." "I guess you're right," the brunette said. "And I think we're really lucky. But you tell them to look for him now and better, and have them hold him. Apparently he won't be sitting still anywhere now." "You got it, boss. Everything will be done to the best of my ability." The assistant smirked. The brunette went back to the hospital. The doctor had just said that the grandmother was already in the room, that she was a little better, and that she could be visited for a while. "You're back in time," Molly said. "I'm sure she'll want to see you too." Molly's heart sank when she saw Nancy thin under the hospital blanket. Pale, weak. Nancy. Molly forced the smile out of herself and walked over and took the old woman's hand. "It's all right now. Are you safe now? How are you feeling?" "Nothing. I'm fine. I think I'm alive," Nancy replied, tears welling up in her eyes. "Oh, Molly, I'm sorry I frightened you. I made you late for work." "No, I'm not. It's not your fault, and he's your grandson." Molly gritting his teeth. "He'll be held accountable. They'll find him, and they'll find him." And then she noticed the change in Nancy's expression. She was looking over her shoulder as if a demon had appeared to her. Molly felt a chill run down her spine. But when she turned around, all she saw was a brunette who was smiling. A welcoming "Hello, Nancy." "You old lady" was barely breathing. "Is that you? I'm glad you remember me after all these years," grinned the brunette, then turned to Molly. "We haven't had a chance to get acquainted. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Hector. So I understand." A doctor stopped by the room. "But visiting hours are kind of running out. You can still stop by tonight. But in the meantime." "Yes, of course," Molly nodded. "We all understand. I'll definitely be back, Nancy." Hector took the old lady's hand and kissed it. "I am happy to meet you again and be of service to you. I am at your disposal." Molly beckoned to Hector. He was certainly a marvelous one. Then they walked out of the room together. "That's a man," said a woman in her 50s, a neighbor in the ward. "A relative?" "No," said Nancy, who was shivering slightly. She was wearing a blanket, though, and the room was warm. The family friend did not relent. "A curious neighbor. Sounds like a complicated person, a foreigner or something. He had an accent. Shall we introduce him?" I winked at the neighbor. "I have an unmarried daughter." "Good girl, manager, owner. And what the hell should he do on the spot?" exclaimed Nancy and quietly cried. "Why did he come?" Now the demon. The neighbor was silent, stopped smiling, and felt extremely uncomfortable, and also thought that maybe the appearance of an imposing stranger is deceptive. Molly wasn't a carcass by nature, but somehow, after leaving the hospital, she and Mason had struck up an easy conversation, and he had told her amazing things, that he knew Nancy when she was living in France. "I was friends with her grandson Charles," he replied, looking with honest eyes, tinged with a touch of nostalgia. "We crossed paths with him a few years ago, but I think such friendships are not worth losing. I've been looking for him, and these are the dire circumstances. Charles seems to have fallen victim to alcohol, and I can't believe he was capable of such atrocities. He invited Molly to a cafe to have a bite to eat after all his worries and spend some time talking before he could visit Nancy again. Molly agreed. It was too late to go back to her job anyway. By the time she got to the village, she would have missed the time to visit Nancy. So the girl just called work, apologized and explained the situation. And then over a cup of coffee, Molly suddenly told Mason so much, just laid it all out. And about Nancy and the village, and even about her personal life, right down to her childhood memories. And then she was frightened by her own frankness, not realizing that it had come over her like a charm. But on the other hand, Hector was so charming, so disposed to himself, and so looked into his eyes that it was simply impossible to look away. But he didn't talk much about himself. He only said that he had a business in France inherited from his father, and that he had come here on business, and to see an old friend. And then they went back to the hospital. Only Nancy saw Hector and got so worried that she said she wouldn't talk to him. She wouldn't talk to him. She said she didn't want to talk about time, the past. That life was gone, and well, it was gone. At that, Nancy kept turning away so as not to meet Hector's eyes. "Well, I'm sorry," he sighed so sincerely that Molly wanted to shake Nancy and ask her sternly why she was hurting such a good man. "Isn't it clear that he means well? In that case, I can only go away. But you," he smiled at Molly. "Kindly take care of her," he said, then handed Molly another wad of money and walked out. "How's it going, boss?" asked the assistant as Hector got into the car. "The old woman is a tough nut to crack," Hector replied. "That your charms don't work on her." Laughter, said the aide. "But it happens, boss. So I got a call saying they found Charles. But there's a good chance he's gone. Then let's not waste any time." Hector's face contorted into a predatory grin. "Let's go." Molly, sitting down on the chair next to Nancy's bed, gave her the contents of the conversation with the doctor. It turned out that, as if the health of the old woman was not threatened. But the doctor, having learned that Nancy had not visited any polyclinics for a year, strictly said that it was extremely imprudent at her age, and he asked Molly to indoctrinate the patient. "Don't worry, Nancy," Molly smiled. "It's all right. You'll be discharged soon. You'll be going home soon. And I'll look after you there. You'll live to see it. As for your grandson, we don't have him." "Don't do anything to Charles," said Nancy and Molly. He choked on the air, because Nancy suddenly began to say that no, Charles is not guilty of anything. It was the Dan vodka. But he's a good man. No matter how good he was in the past, maybe when he was a kid, but now he's an adult and has to take responsibility for his actions. Molly shook her head. "You can't leave it like that, Nancy. You don't know." A few tears rolled from the old woman's eyes. "Oh, girl, you don't know it was me Charles ruined. And then now this creature's come for his soul. On his soul, just like his father." "Who are you talking about?" Molly frowned. "Nancy. You mustn't worry. Why don't you go back to ancient times and rest now? And then, no. Nancy grabbed Molly's hand again with sudden force, so that it hurt. I've kept it all to myself for years, and now I have to tell you. I'm sorry, my roommate spoke up, but maybe I should move to the far bunk. Just for now. I'll hear everything by accident, because I'm right next to you. No, sighed Nancy. I don't care anymore. They're ready to tell the world the truth. There was no one else in the room but the three of them, and Nancy began her story. She spoke quickly, easily, clearly, and intelligently, as if she were reading a book, pouring out her soul. The facts were stated. She didn't announce herself to others. She just began to tell everything as it was, and about her youth, and big, selfish dreams, and about the marriage that ended in tragedy, and about how she didn't save her grandson, entrusting the child into the hands of a monster, and about how she returned home and forgot everything. Until she didn't go out. Wow, said the neighbor on the ward, when Nancy finished her story. Hollywood's on vacation. Are you sure this is the man, the boy in the past? Molly asked. Yes. Nancy nodded. Noah Black had an only son. His name was Hector. And this is him. His eyes. I was beginning to forget my own husband's face, too, but his eyes are all his father's. He went. Molly to Sveta, the little old lady, looked on with a desperate plea, save my grandson. He must not be the first to find him. All right, Molly agreed, though she couldn't quite figure out what she should do now. But to refuse Nancy's request, yes, especially when she was in the hospital, even more so. After the whole story she'd heard, she couldn't. All right, I'll do whatever it takes. Molly was on her way back to the village in the late afternoon. Where have you been? She was met on the doorstep by her disgruntled little sister. My father and I are hungry. In general, Molly has already gotten used to the fact that it is her duty to cook for the family. And when I dinner at all to run the house, she did not demand much. They are from my father, not from my sister. And even pitied. She gave birth to Mashenka when she was just a baby, and the age of a difficult teenager. But suddenly, the new Molly realized it. They both lost the same mother. She, too, was orphaned early and, as a teenager, had to shoulder so much on her shoulders. And this James, he's a smart kid, goes to school in the city, and doesn't beg for money. Grew up to be a man. And your father? He lost his wife, but he still has 3 kids, and Molly gave Maria a cold, reproachful look. Since she was 17, girls, and I'd never worked a day, but I only have dancing. Watching videos on the internet about the lives of the rich and famous. If you're hungry, make your own dinner. Boil some pasta and fry some cutlets. There's plenty in the freezer. It's a lot of work, she said, and went back to the front door. I've got things to do. Let's look after your father. She's a big girl. It was very strange, but for some reason it all fell out. Molly felt such moral relief. She felt so much better, and she hurried over to Grandpa Jacob's house. Because if there was one person who could be trusted with the whole story of Nancy, from whom one could truly ask for help, it was Grandpa Jacob. Charles, on leaving the village, was in feelings of the most confused kind. He wanted more than anything to be lost somewhere in the surrounding woods and fields, like a wild beast, and not to be found. To the realization of what he had done to his own grandmother was now added a burning fear. A man from his past, Hector. Why did he come? Certainly not to reminisce about the good old days. Charles didn't know what was going on yet, but on some deep instinctive level, he sensed that this man was a threat to him. On foot, at a brisk pace, so that his heart almost jumped out of his chest. Charles reached the station, and there he suddenly began to feel that he was being watched, that everywhere there were eyes and ears that served his enemy. Hector, fighting the urge to just throw himself screaming wherever he wanted to go. Charles began to slowly step aside. He suddenly thought that the best thing for him to do was to go back to Zorka and have his men capture him, have him subdued for all he had done. and then just had them take him to Nancy, and he would apologize to her for everything. That's definitely the way to do it. That's the only thing to do. But no sooner had Charles stepped out of the station at the hamlet neighboring the ferrets than he suddenly ran into someone. And then everything happened very quickly. "Quiet, if you don't want trouble," said a sturdy bald type to him, taking him under the arm in a seemingly polite but tenacious manner. "Follow me and be quiet. Just a few more moments." Charles didn't even realize how it had happened, but he was like in a daze. He didn't scream. He didn't call for help. He was just in shock because he realized that he was being led to the gut of the SUV in which Hector was sitting. "But hello," said his like a childhood friend who was also sitting in the back seat. The bald type sat forward. Charles opened his mouth and for some reason could not make a sound. Then he swallowed hard. "What do you want?" he asked, barely audible. "Which one?" "Good question." Hector grinned. "Yeah, sort of. I guess we never would have seen each other if it hadn't been for certain circumstances. You know, I was happy for you when everything happened and my father was arrested. You know, I always felt especially sorry for you." Charles could not stop staring into Hector's eyes like a hypnotist as he spoke, and he realized that he was not lying. The car started and drove off. Hector, meanwhile, went on. He said that, yes, he didn't share his father's beliefs, but he was an authoritative parental figure. What could a child do against her? Hector said he was very relieved when it was over. After all, neither he nor the other kids had to be subjected to nightmarish mind control experiments anymore. "Do you want to know why he did that?" Hector asked. And although Charles shook his head negatively, hysterically, he still said. He said that his father believed that through special techniques of influence on the psyche can be raised a kind of future special forces, which will obey once laid in them programs. True, at the stage when Charles was involved in this creepy and supposedly scientific experiment, the children were simply suppressed, without having any programs put into them yet. "I see." Hector smiled sympathetically. "I had nightmares myself for a long time. My father got what he deserved. I was taken care of. And I got my inheritance in due time. Except, you know, he owned one thing, and it was very important, not only to him, but to his ancestors. It was supposed to be inherited by me, but it was missing. No one knew where it went. Our estate. There are too many difficult memories associated with it." Hector continued without haste. "But although no one lives there, it is guarded. But unfortunately, the security system was breached, and the cameras detected an intruder entering the house. This person just started walking around the garden for some reason. Curious, isn't it? And then he seemed to take something from an old oak tree. Unfortunately, it wasn't clear from the video what it took, but my people were able to find out what the man was, and I immediately guessed what he might have taken." The car slowed down. While they had been talking, it had left the station, driven around the village, and was now standing on the riverbank, almost at the edge of the cliff. Hector moved closer, looking at Charles very intently. And then I thought, what a strange coincidence, and I decided that we should meet. Charles was breathing heavily. He was feeling so bad right now. And then he started talking and told me everything he was thinking and feeling. He remembered how at first he truly thought of Hector as his friend. And then he couldn't understand how he continued to love him in spite of everything his father had done. "I wish we had never met again," Charles said. "You'll never see me again," Hector grinned. "Just give me what's mine." "Why do you even want that ring?" "I don't know," Charles answered honestly. "I was a kid then. And I don't know, I wanted some kind of revenge. And then I thought that if I took it, it would make it easier to accept the past." "And how did it get easier?" Hector asked curtly. "No," Charles replied. "So you want the ring?" In a matter of moments, Charles suddenly jumped out of the car, ran up to the cliff. He stretched out his hand, and on his open palm a silver ring glinted dimly in the setting sun. "If you knew how much I hate you." He spat out anger with a bitter, marching resentment from childhood. "How can you, after all he has done to us, Live like this. I see the master of life is not poor. It's all right. I don't have nightmares. How many kids have their lives ruined? Have you ever thought about it? It wasn't my problem. Hector reconciled himself. He was getting closer, as if the unspoken but explicit threat to throw the ring into the river didn't bother him at all. The victims and their families have been generously compensated from my father's estate. Your grandmother, by the way, was offered one, but she declined. What was I supposed to do? Give up the family business, suffer for the rest of my life? Yes, my father was wrong, Hector sighed. But my life goes on, and I have no intention of letting anyone interfere with my plans. Give it back, Charles. And why would I do that? Tears rolled down the man's face. You think you can buy me? Money doesn't interest you, Hector said. But I must let you in on a little secret. My father taught me something. There's a special gift passed down through the male line in our family. It would be primitive to call it hypnosis, but to make it easier for someone like you to understand, let's call it this. Give me the ring, and then I'll help you. You'll make me forget everything. And no, you will. You'll remember a lot of things, but you'll be able to let it go, and you'll be able to get on with your life. I was also told that you were coded and you started drinking. You know, once you're off it, you can't stop. You're gonna drink more and more until the end. But if you give up what's mine, I'll help you. Charles was breathing hard. He didn't know what to do. On the one hand, he was tempted to show his pride, because he wanted to spite him. But on the other, Charles suddenly looked at all this as if from the outside. They were kids back then, and maybe if he had been in a similar situation himself, then no matter how much of a monster his father was, he wouldn't have been able to disown him completely. Yes, it was wrong, all right. But Charles remembered himself how much he hated Nancy's grandmother, and made up his mind. The ring glinted in the setting sun and disappeared into the palm of Hector's hand, and then went to his finger on his left hand. Say nothing more and look me in the eye, Hector said, and placing his palms on Charles's shoulders, stood directly in front of him. And then he spoke. He spoke in several languages, including Latin, and the words were like whipping blows, penetrating Charles's consciousness. Molly and Grandpa Jacob went through all the options. They managed to drive Jacob's son-in-law's car to the train station. The lady at the cafeteria told them that she had seen a man who looked like Charles, but that he had left in an expensive car. No, it can't be. Molly was shocked. What can you do? Jacob said. Maybe Nancy is exaggerating. Maybe Hector doesn't want to hurt Charles. Why would he? All right, Molly, you can do it. You can go and look all night long. I'm getting old. I'm going home. Yes, perhaps sleep is the best idea, sighed Molly, who had a terrible headache from the worries of the day. So she and Jacob set off back to the village. Molly did not yet know that on their return, they would find Nancy Charles in the house, who had become a very different person, who had let go of the burden of the past and was ready to start a new life. And also to take care, like a good grandson takes care of his grandmother. Little did she know that by the time they all did, she, Charles, and Nancy would have a thorough talk about everything. Hector and his assistant would already be back in France. Molly could not know in advance that her brother would return from the city on vacation from vocational school, not alone, but with his good friend, an ordinary and very good guy named Volodya, who would become for Molly first just a kind acquaintance, and then a caring husband. And that with his support she will manage to gradually cure her father, as well as re-educate her sister, who will eventually enter the veterinarian and decide to devote her life to caring for animals. Molly did not suspect that in a few years a tourist company will come to Zorka village and open a hotel here. Tourists will come here, and the area would become much more prosperous. And Charles would end up working here as a tour guide and eventually marry the shop girl. But all that was just ahead. In the meantime, the cockerels sang their evening song over the village and the sun set. The first stars spilled out into the sky, and the moon emerged from behind the clouds with its silvery side and dived back into their ghostly downy railing, created a sparkling path on the river. subscribe, and click the bell. Behind this psychiatric clinic in the city, and in general in the region, have long been bad rumors, like what happens in horror movies, and Michael had certainly heard about it. And when his mother and grandmother found out that he is an excellent student, and a graduate of medical school goes there to work as an orderly, one of them waved his hands. "Grandson, you're the only man left in the family. Don't go there. Michael, you know I'm from an ancient noble family. I may not have 1 million, but I'll find the money to pay for your internship abroad." "Grandma, what money? What abroad? I have to make my own way, just like my grandfather." And the boy nodded his head at the portrait of his grandfather hanging on the wall. And indeed, Michael had someone to look up to. His grandfather was a famous surgeon, and his father, who died in Afghanistan, blew himself up on a mine, saving the military. And so he decided to become a doctor, but not a surgeon like his grandfather and father, but a psychiatrist. Why psychiatry? My mother joked in the first year of school, "But Mom, if the body my grandfather and father studied, so to speak, in detail, then psychiatry is a real field for research, a Klondike." Yes, you're a researcher. I hope. Psychiatry isn't contagious. Oh, Mom, don't worry. It's not like it's the flu or anything. Maybe I can find my own unique method of therapy for mentally ill patients. Yeah, and bring people like Chikatilo back into society. "So Adriana, please don't bring it up," said the grandmother, stepping in for her grandson. The case of this serial maniac was then on the rumor, and the whole country was following him. But the mother reacted too painfully to her. Michael understood her because her own sister Adriana, and his own aunt, the only close person, killed by an unknown assailant, and the culprit was never found. The investigator then said that it could be a maniac, but now in many women saw negative elements of society, especially if they stayed in such institutions as their own city institution for the mentally ill. Mom, you are an adult, and you understand that it is better to treat such people, recognize them as sane, and then pass a sentence, than to spend money on them to keep them in such houses as ours for years. And you're still defending him. The mother was outraged, but she knew her son's temper. Michael, you're just like your father, just as stubborn. All right, but don't complain to me about anything. Adriana, don't worry. My grandson will complain to his legal grandmother. You mean me? Betty gently ruffled the thick red curls of his favorite grandson. Grandma, but I'm not a boy anymore. Not a boy, but not yet a husband. So listen to your mother, but also to me sometimes. So they lived in the old Tsar's house, where they had a 5-room apartment with its own fireplace and a large library, luxurious balconies, which still kept traces of the old stucco. This house was in the very center of the city, stood on a small hill, and was considered one of the elite in the city. For it, even many rich men and millionaires, even one criminal authority, gave crazy money for the family to sell their apartment. No way, said Betty's grandmother, who was considered the head of the family and whose word was final. This apartment will serve my great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. So just stop asking me stupid questions like if I want to sell the apartment and leave me alone. That's all she said a few years ago to a city criminal mastermind. And strangely enough, but after that they really didn't bother them anymore. They didn't even start organizing invasion raids, as it often happened in those times. That's how they lived. Michael, dreaming of becoming a famous psychiatrist, and his mother and grandmother, whom he madly loved and idolized. No, there were girls in his life, and even an older woman, but he loved few. Yes, there was a crush, even a feeling like love, but nothing serious. He went on studying, falling in love, dating. Now he was interning at a psychiatric clinic in their town. Yes, and talked the most horrible and heartbreaking, up to the fact that their orderlies and doctors have fun with mentally ill beauty, but no one could prove it. What do you want me to do? Michael asked his old friend Benjamin, who told him all this. Do. I really have to go over the border, as my grandmother says. But you know, you'd have to sell the last of it. And what would I do in that prosperous Europe? And you realize their methods and ours are probably incompatible. So that's where it stands. I'm already used to the realities of our medicine and psychiatry, in particular, as well as methods of therapy. What's a handful of pills? I'd rather have a shot in the vein, or even for some freaks in general. Orbital lobotomy. You're a bloodthirsty Benjamin. I'm way ahead of you. Aha. That's why I went into dentistry, so I could yank my patient's teeth with a vengeance. And the guy was soon making a grimace that made them both laugh. A healthy laugh. Crooked faces like first graders. It was normal. In their practice, doctors, they are such and black humor that help them endure the specifics and difficulties of the job. Often the lack of weekends when there is no one on shifts. And you do all the work for 3 people so you cannot die long, or even go crazy and become like his future charges patients in a psychiatric clinic. Yeah, Ethan, I probably should have chosen dentistry like you, and my grandmother insisted that my senior year I choose dentistry or gynecology. But that's just not my thing, you know. I see, Michael, then you'll have to go to me for dental care and one of our girls for gynecology. I'll give you a headache. All right, buddy, I gotta go home. I gotta get ready for my first day of private dentistry tomorrow. I'm on the phone for now. Michael nodded, and after shaking hands, they parted ways. He had to go to his mental hospital tomorrow. Then, it was worth it to come home early, to pack a bag, and for once, not to sit in front of the TV until night, to sleep. Already at home he had dinner and brewed himself a fragrant tea. Michael sat down at the computer, an old computer brought from Europe, but still capable of much computer brought to him under the order from a friend of his grandmother for his birthday. When Michael was in his 2nd year of study, and the guy's joy was unbounded. Grandma, this is a real treasure. Luckily, the guy had no limit. And now he sat down at the computer, started the system, and connected the internet. Yeah, the internet is power. The ability to communicate with the world, to learn a lot. And now he decided to keep his own electronic diary of his internship at work, including everything he saw and heard, what methods were used, and what the doctors achieved. Maybe I'll even write a dissertation based on this diary. Not many secrets this asylum hides. Is this your institution for the mentally ill? Grandma came into the room and put a tray with a huge tea and sweet spoons on the table. Yes, Grandma, I'm thinking of keeping a diary. Maybe I'll see something interesting, and there are strange things going on in your almshouse. Grandma, do you know something? Tell me, please. I know something. Betty sat down on her grandson's bed and thought about it. That sometimes I see girls and young women in weird outfits, but they also have ribbons in their hair. Grandma, well, the outfits are ordinary, hospital outfits. Maybe some suits came from humanitarian aid. And the ribbons? Maybe one of the nurses got sick. No, grandson, something else. Outfits. Grandma thought for a moment, and then said, you know, like in adult movies, a dress, short stockings, and netting. Somehow the guy raised an eyebrow in surprise. Strangely, he had passed by this place many times, but he hadn't really paid attention to the patients. His grandmother, on the other hand, did. She looked at her grandson carefully, and then continued. And about the ribbons, you know, they're weird too. How can I explain it to you? Well, what caught your attention? Just tell me the first thing you noticed. The guy felt like a detective, but he was already wondering what his astute grandmother had seen. Betty pressed her lips together and then gave out. They're red with glitter. So what? Grandma, it's bright and beautiful. I guess crazy people like that. I don't know about that. You know, in my time, so to speak, pre-revolutionary ribbons like this were stuffed in the hair of girls of easy virtue in brothels. And here, they'd walk around like that. and they'd be highlighted with ribbons, so to speak. It's not human. You shouldn't make the poor and disadvantaged look like the poor and disadvantaged. Ugh. And also such ribbons flew hair only young and beautiful. Grandma, you're my Agatha Christie. Really, how many times have I walked by and just not paid attention? It's impossible not to pay attention to such an inferential outfit. All right. Well, I take what you said, and I'll pay attention. Maybe I'll uncover some kind of world conspiracy. And the guy smiled his beautiful smile, but he didn't know how close he was to the truth. This hospital was a place for the mildly insane. As the doctors would say, those who didn't require enhanced confinement. That's why the patients could walk by themselves in the equipped yard of the institution, awarded with a fence. But the guy would learn about it later, when he would encounter the most horrible and disgusting thing that could happen in his professional life. Monday turned out to be surprisingly sunny and similar, especially after a night of threatening rain that walled the city. Yes, Michael thought, waking up in the night and looking out the window to rain like that could wash away the whole city and my psychotic charges with it. But the morning was clear and sunny, and there was practically nothing left from the traces of rain, except for broken branches and leaves on the ground. Yeah, it's a lot of work for a janitor, the boy said aloud. That's right, said the janitor of the Sheik grandmother Sophia, who has been cleaning the yard. Since 5 o'clock, she's already cleaned so much, and still waving the broom. Good luck to you. And the guy, throwing his backpack on his shoulder, went to his new place of practice. On the approach to the psychiatric clinic, the guy decided to walk around it a bit, on the other side, so that he could see the place where their patients usually strolled, and to pay attention to what his grandmother was talking about yesterday. Indeed, there were several girls walking in the courtyard, dressed in very revealing outfits with brightly colored ribbons in their hair. But the strangest thing was not only the orderlies, but also the head doctor and his 2 deputies were standing aside. They looked at their charges and smilingly discussed something. And the head doctor was looking at Kathy, a new patient who had been brought in a few days ago, a victim of hypnosis, or rather a failed experiment of the psychopath, a doctor who practiced his trance technique on her. Yeah, the guy thought. Such things happen in the practice of doctors. As the grief doctor told the law enforcers, this method he tried to muffle her inner hunger. What kind of hunger? One of the investigators asked the doctor. Sexual hunger. She was just obsessed with men, always wanting sex. I tried to bring her back to a normal life, although so far I had to cure her with this method by my refinement, to cure her. Or maybe it was just you decorating her like that. I was saving her from herself. The doctor was sure he was doing good. But, as Michael thought to himself, having heard the girl's story and the doctor's testimony, he was no less crazy than his victim, whom he had turned into a vegetable. Yes, thought the new orderly from one prison, or rather office, psycho, experimenter to the clinic, or rather, a study, a psycho, an experimenter in a clinic where she was looked upon as a subject of pleasures and possible molestation. Well, if you've got your eye on her, I'm gonna have to keep an eye on you, Kathy. Now I realize my grandmother was right about something. You don't dress patients like that. This isn't a catwalk, it's a clinic. Michael took out a pack of cigarettes and smoked, even though he'd only dabbled before. As his downstairs neighbor, Uncle Benjamin, who'd been in the camps for years, would say, he was translating product, also a colorful type. The guy remembered about him. But in reality, as he was an Urka and a political prisoner in the past owned such a 3-room apartment. Michael even once asked him jokingly, who will get your chambers and jacuzzi? To which he replied, squint your eyes at him. Don't be jealous. I won this house with my teeth. And the neighbor showed his not too healthy strong teeth. Don't look at my teeth. I can still do a lot. And the apartment is my mother's inheritance, not the state's. Believe me, Uncle Benjamin, but you don't have children. Who told you I don't? I had a daughter, but she died in childbirth. So there's only one beloved grandson. But why doesn't he visit you? Where is he? Do you even know? Because he lives abroad. My daughter married an Arab. She fell in love and went to the Emirates. To tell the truth, she lived like a cheese in butter. I wouldn't give her that. But I guess you have to pay for everything. And I guess she paid the price when she gave birth. I'm sorry, Uncle Benjamin, I really didn't know. Hold on. There's a grandson. Have you even seen him? Yes, he came to my daughter's funeral. To her grave, to be exact. She converted to Islam and was buried on the day she died. So I only got the grave. I'm sorry. You're welcome. My grandson's growing up and my daughter's husband calls me and shows me his grandson via video link. He keeps asking me to come over, but I can't leave the house. Yes, and here I am among neighbors as my own and smiling through tears. Neighbor went to his apartment. Michael stood smoking under the fence net and did not understand why he remembered him. But fate would once again bring the neighbors together in this case, albeit in a very unusual way. And now Michael stood smoking, looking, and could not make a step and continue his way. Maybe throw it to hell under his nose, said the guy. And then he almost jumped. On his shoulder lay the hand of William, the lead doctor, clinic, and supervisor of Michael's practice, who had seen the guy get off at the bus stop, how he had smoked, stopping under an old lime tree. And as he watched a group of paramedics walking in the courtyard of patients of doctors, laughing them among themselves, probably at some oily joke. Who are you gonna leave? Certainly not the practice at our fun and games place, but I think you're overdoing it on the fun and games. No, it's definitely that kind of black doctor humor. It is so, sort of so humor. The doctor smiled and took his ward under his arm and led him towards the psychiatric hospital, slowly but surely moving him towards the horrors that were going on inside its walls. The doctor had already made the decision to either involve Michael in his games or simply deprive him of his sanity if he did not agree to participate. Why him? It's simple. Michael is a new man in their collective one not so long ago, by chance, and he's strong for his age, plus handsome. Here is such a boy handsome, which is exactly suitable for filming spicy movies. Already in the clinic, the head doctor Noah and William took him through all the buildings, floors, and wards. Yes, the views are not the best, and emotions are not the brightest. Why should he be surprised, though? He knew where he was going. Michael was tormented by his grandmother's reasoning, but he knew if he asked that question directly, he'd be laughed at. But at the most, he'd get suspended. And the guy would never find out. Noah asked Michael over tea at the resident. There are all sorts of rumors about this clinic, in particular, mystical rumors. What do you have to say about that? Oh, Michael, you're a medical student, but you talk like a philology student who wants folklore. Or are you afraid of the ghost of the old empress or mother? The mother superior who drowned a truck in our pond at night. There's even a pond here. The boy's amazement was unparalleled. How long has he lived here in this town? I knew of clinics in the neighborhood, but the fact that there's also a pond. Remember the old movie about the Three Musketeers? Well, we have a lively pond just like that. It was organized by the previous head doctor. His wife worked as a landscape designer. So they set it up. We have a lily pond here. It's beautiful. There were fish swimming in it, but I guess our climate didn't suit them. They died out over the winter. But our patients don't care whether they're fish or lilies. And Ethan, an orderly with huge fists and a face resembling a tango arena, laughed as Michael's laughter made him shudder, and the doctors simply did not pay attention to him. And why do they tolerate such people in the clinic? Although on the other hand, there are some violent people who can't be subdued without physical force. Yeah, but Ethan's rudeness sometimes got to Michael, as did the thought of having to work with someone like that. Ethan, You show Michael to your office, where he can change his clothes, leave his things in the lockers and all that. He's only here for a couple months, so to speak, a couple months internship. But it's still got to be determined. Ethan nodded his head and waved his huge fist at Michael. Michael didn't show his displeasure. Let it be. A couple of months could be tolerated. And then he was promised to be taken to the second city as a staff psychiatrist, so he didn't worry about it too much. Michael obediently went down to the basement with Ethan and went to the very back of the clinic. Here, the orderlies had set up a room for a locker room and a kind of sports corner where you can hit a punching bag and play chess and dominoes. Don't be shy. Michael, take any locker that's not open. We have a lot of open seats right now, so let's get settled in. Why do so few people want to work at the clinic? Michael started asking questions from afar. I mean, who wants to hang out with a psycho? A lot of people think of it as a contagion. Being a psycho too. I just don't know any other job. Although at one time, just like you, I studied medicine. What did you study for? An orderly, that's what I studied. And my uncle put me to work here. My uncle. He's Noah. You've seen him. He's our chief of medicine. Good acquaintances, the boy thought, but he didn't say anything. Michael changed his clothes and began to get ready for his shift. The shift went relatively smoothly, and the next morning, the guy threw his backpack on his shoulders and left the clinic building. The sun was shining brightly, and there was nothing to portend any trouble, and all the things he had changed his mind about yesterday. Michael, it seemed like a fairy tale or fantasy. But really, what kind of fairy tales are fairy tales? We live in our developed world with computers, cameras on every corner. Even if there was something going on here, it would have been made public a long time ago. Michael, good morning. William called out to the guy and extended his hand to greet him and got straight to the point. How was your shift? Smoke. I don't smoke. Thank you. Yesterday it was just a dalliance, but the shift. Thank you. Everything went smoothly. William, can I make a personal request if I'm not interrupting something more important? Sure. Yes, of course. Anything I can do. Could you show me that pond you told me about yesterday? Wow. I guess you got caught up in the story last night. Come on. It's in the backyard. I'll show you around. I gotta be honest, you can't see it from the street. It took me a while to find it myself. It's so hidden, it's creepy. Is this place really inhabited? The center of Izhevsk. The doctor looked at him with a slight chuckle and said nothing, but waved his hand and led him deep into the park area of the hospital. Yeah, it's a bit of a wilderness, and that the most strange noise of cars from the street was not heard, although the clinic itself was located at the crossroads of quite busy central city roads. How quiet is it? And strangely enough, you can't hear much traffic from the road. Yes, you're right, Michael. You've noticed it's quiet. And here's the twig itself, and the head doctor spread the branches with his hands and let the boy go ahead. It's beautiful. Before, Michael opened a pond, laid out of stones behind burned black lilies, around which willows grew. And what was the most amazing thing? There were several statues in antique style of girls, hunting or carrying jugs on their shoulders. He had not seen such statues for a long time. Oh, it's beautiful. And notice the angle and the shot. You could even make a movie. What kind of horror movie have you seen in our cellars? There's no such thing as a cellar. Why? There are some. Yes, imagine that. And they lead to the local Cathedral of the Transfiguration, which is across the street from us. Are these cellars or cellars? I don't know. They lead to the monastery, and they say the monks at our clinic have the right people. And all because it wouldn't occur to anyone to look for a healthy person in a mental institution. Then there's been some kind of collapse in some places. Now these passages are impassable. That's for sure. No one's gonna come in here willingly. And then he noticed on the opposite bank the figure of a girl in a racy outfit. Kathy, he remembered her, because she had been brought here on the day when he had come to see the head doctor and applied for an internship at this clinic. The girl herself was not in the state she was in at the time. She was screaming at the doctors that the psychiatrist wanted to kill her. She's hearing voices and everything. That Kathy suffers from inner voices and a hypertrophied sex drive. Well, that's what her previous doctor said. Who knows? So far, the girl hasn't said a word. Why is she dressed like that? Short dress, fishnet stockings, ribbon in her hair. You know, Michael, it's one of my methods of letting the patient choose what they want. And by the way, where'd you get that outfit? That's a good question. Like many theatrical costumes, it was left to us by a theater. Exactly the theater. The director was jailed for some dark deeds, he and his wife. And the actors just ran away. And since the theater was near us, it's not a waste. And they were all dressed like royalty. Yes, imagining you as Henry Valois or Peter the Great. Michael, you're joking. But by the way, we had a wonderful carnival night here on New Year's Eve. And there was even a story about us in the paper. I hope it wasn't in a good context that a disguised Napoleon was walking around town claiming to be the real chief medical officer. No, we're all understanding people with a sense of humor. So we just hung around the Christmas tree. That one over there, by the way, by the entrance. And you know, people even took pictures with us on New Year's Eve. Yeah, that was fun. Thank you for the tour. I'm gonna go home and get some sleep. Thursday again for 24 hours. Michael, don't try too hard. You can't do all the work. You're a young guy. I nodded my head. But I thought to myself, no, I'm going to get you out of this. I think you're hiding something. Dear head doctor, but you don't need to know that. I had dinner tonight and sat down at the computer. Michael quickly made the first entries in his diary and then began to look for information about the local clinic. And indeed, there was a lot of information about it. Strangely enough, there was a lot of information about it, and with a very negative connotation. Murders, suicides, and strange deaths of both patients and doctors. Yes, there was a lot to work on and a lot to find out. But it was Kathy that bothered him the most. And he thought to himself, why not keep a sneaky eye on her room? The girl herself. Not without reason the head doctor was looking at her with such olive eyes. Grandma, the boy called out to his grandmother. Why did you shop like that? You won't let me watch my favorite TV show. What did you want? Grandma, I saw a girl at the clinic today. She was a victim of an incompetent hypnotist and suffered as a result. But that's not the point. She was wearing the outfit you mentioned, short dress, stockings, and a sash. Not surprising. One of your executives must have had their eye on her. I mean, she's new. She's a young girl too. I take it. So you're going to steal her? No, Grandma, I just want to keep an eye on her room. It's on the first floor, so it won't be a problem. To do anything, you have to have proof. That's what I'm required to do. Really, Michael, I'm old. I'm not going to play Sherlock Holmes with you. I'm more of a Mrs. Hudson. Grandma, that's not what I mean. Just cover for me in front of Mom. I'm gonna go over to the clinic tonight, stake out the windows, so to speak. I found a military A in Grandpa's closet. Okay, if anything, I'll tell Mom you're home already asleep. She's on call today anyway, so she won't be home. But you're my grandson, please. Don't get into any trouble. Okay. Michael nodded his head and poked the old lady on the cheek. He went back to his computer. What's going on at the clinic? How was your shift? The old woman was still interested in how true or not the rumors were. The rumors about the asylum. Yeah, Grandma. It's okay. I told you it was nothing like that. No, it's not. Our head doctor showed me the old pond on the grounds today, the one with the black lilies. Grandma didn't tell me about it. I went there and saw it Because the wife of the former head doctor was my friend, and the pond itself is her creation. But the doctor didn't tell you that in the same pond they found the wife of the former one drowned. The guy shook his head, looked at his grandmother in surprise. But there's knee-deep water, and that's it. And this is the strangest thing. Her body was lying with her head in the water. She was submerged in the water, but her arms and legs were lying flat along her torso. They took a sturdy, adequate soldier and put her face down. That's all. And then they found water from the pond in his lungs. No signs of violence on the body. If that's what you're asking, it's odd that she came in, lay down, and swallowed the water to death. Drowned of her own volition. The guy was being sarcastic. But looking at the expression on his grandmother's face, he immediately faltered. Betty did not tolerate unnecessary words and jokes, and therefore immediately warned her grandson. Yes, Michael, death is strange. But if she did it herself, then she had a reason. And maybe even her own husband is the same as your current boss's overbearing. There's nothing to cure them. Maybe, under the old doctor, he and his brothers also had fun with innocent girls, and his wife found out and drowned them both. So, what of it? Or maybe who drowned them? But really, she won't become a ghost of a ghost, will she? Maybe she wouldn't. But believe me, there's something scary going on out there. And I'll tell you honestly, this new girl isn't worth the danger she's bringing upon herself. Trust me. The Brotherhood of Doctors, it's like that. Everyone protects each other. And even if they do something to her, that you can get to the bottom of it. But understand, a doctor will not testify against a doctor. So get on your nerves and leave her in there. At least I'll get her out and save her that way. All right. Michael, don't yell. I hear you. I accept your position. But I'm trying to warn you. You're putting yourself in a lot of danger. I understand all that. That's why I'm telling you where I'm going and what I intend to do. Betty nodded and stood up, heading for the door. She was worried about her grandson, but she realized she couldn't keep the young and hot guy away. So the woman simply stood on the doorstep and turned and said to Michael, "What if you take Uncle Benjamin, our neighbor from the second floor, to help you? He's old, but he's lean. And with his criminal record, he'd be a big help. I'll think about it. But it's not a bad idea. Although I'll tell you right away, I'll have to see for myself, do some recon, and then I'll tell them what's going on. Even if I go to him now, what can I say? Uncle Benjamin is there in the clinic raping women and many other things. And he'll tell me, prove it. Just words. And I don't really believe it all myself. Just because a place is weird and old doesn't mean you can't ring all the bells. Yeah, there's too many girls. There's too many crazy people. And there's too many masquerades. But it's all right." And the grandmother left the room, closing the door a little behind her. Michael leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. Uncle Benjamin is a criminal, but the grandmother is right. His experience and his nose for crime might help him. And an extra set of hands and eyes can always help. But first you have to go and see for yourself, and then you can go to your neighbor. All right, let's get ready. Michael threw a flashlight and a bottle of water into his backpack. Binoculars with good German optics can take a camera. What for? Basically, there's a cell phone. You can take video and photos with it. Okay, that's fine for the first time. Anyway, I'm not going to go in there. And throwing it on his shoulders, Michael went out into the corridor and began to study. The sounds Betty came out of his room and looked at his offspring carefully. You're coming. Yes, Grandma. Don't worry. I've got the phone, but don't call. I'll call you if I need to. In the meantime, lock it up. I think I'll be on the train in a couple of hours. 20 minutes to get there. An hour and a half and back. 20 minutes. So look, it'll be 3 hours. All right. Grandson, but please be careful. If anything happens to me, your mother will rip my head off. Michael smiled at his favorite person and kissed her. He went outside. It was getting dark. What's so surprising? After work he washed up, then ate, and slept, and now full of strength can and observe. The guy smiled, thought to himself that he should have gone not to the doctor, but probably to the investigators. Here is a confirmation of his words. A patrol car passed by and lit up the road with flashing beacons, but it alarmed the guy. No, not the car itself, not the flashing lights. It was the fact that the policeman stopped it around the corner and got out quietly, covering the door. They slammed it shut, as usual, quietly slipped through the hole in the fence of the psychiatric clinic, and went just as quietly, whispering among themselves. Wow! The cops are also in business, and the young medic's bewilderment had no limit. Did these columns, as his grandmother would say, come here too? Wow! Now, it's not just medical malpractice anymore. It's a group of gangs. And that's what he's encountered in practice. Come on. Maybe he just made a mistake, and the police came here on a signal, so to speak, to check what's going on here. But still, these two were acting weird, uncharacteristic. Michael slowly went in the direction of the secret eye. In the fence, jumped in the chassis, hiding behind the dense vegetation, and abundantly growing along this fence. That was a plus right now, and it wasn't exactly a starry night. So the guy slowly crept toward the ominous, overhanging park clinic. This 3-story old pre-revolutionary building was an eyesore in the city. It was going to be demolished long ago, moving the facility to the outskirts. But apparently, it wasn't worth it for the high-ranking officials to go there in search of hidden pleasures. "Come on, come in here," quietly said one policeman, and let the other one inside. The basement. Wow, they got the basement entrance open. I wonder who's on shift today. An old orderly with a long history of alcohol abuse, or Liam. Another one of the orderlies with a huge fist. When Michael himself asked about the door to the basement and the padlock, the head doctor secretly smiled and said, "This is the entrance to our basement paradise. And is it like growing marijuana there?" Michael decided to make a joke, but I guess the joke didn't work. The doctor looked at him sideways and said it wasn't pot. It was something else, but it's too early for him to know. Everything will show and tell later. And now they just let outsiders into this forbidden paradise. Maybe they are part-time security guards. Michael chuckled under his nose and began to approach the clinic building even more quietly. The windows of the wards on the first floor glowed with a dim light. It was the way the duty lights burned. And the light itself was enough to see what was going on in the wards. The guy intuitively approached the window of the room of the new patient, Kathy, and from surprise, almost dumbfounded on the spot. Guy saw her sitting on the bed, dressed in a short schoolgirl dress and with bows in her hair. Yeah, the guy almost whistled in surprise. And apparently, the girl heard his exclamation and looked out the window. Michael intercepted her gaze for a second. He was devastated. Apparently, she'd been pre-sedated with sedatives. But at the same time, there was a silent plea for help. But then, Liam and the doctor in charge entered the room, and the boy sat down instantly so as not to be seen. Michael sat under the window and listened intently to what was going on in the room itself. He heard the footsteps of 2 men and the creaking of a bed. Then the words of the head doctor. "Hello, Kathy. You're already dressed as well as you can be. Now let's go down to the basement with me and Liam. You'll find a lot of interesting things there." The basement where the 2 policemen went. Apparently, they had some sort of organized pleasure nook down there. And that's where they took her, drugged her with psychotropics. But what to do? The guy quietly sank to the ground and put his hands around his head. What to do? What to do? And then the front door creaked and Michael squeezed into the ground. 3 men came out of them and headed towards the basement. Good night was dark, and the yard of the clinic was not illuminated. Therefore, he simply was not noticed. But only the girl turned back. looked in his direction, and cried. Tears rolled silently down her face. Michael heard Noah begin to quietly soothe the girl and told the orderly, "Lie him at the school, to her in the basement for another dose of sedative. We didn't want her to wake up at the right moment." And the chief of police wasn't happy with his new doll. "Yeah, sure, Noah. Let's get her in and give her a quick shot." And the trio began to make their way down to the basement. Michael had one single desire: to break into the basement and snatch Kathy out of the hands of doctors and cops. But he realized how impossible that would be. No, he was not intimidated by the company, the doctors and the cops, to do their dark deeds. But he realized they'd just smash him there. And that would be it. And no one will know where his grave is. Call the militia. What will he say there? The head doctor and a policeman raping a mentally ill patient won't believe him. And even if they do, what's next? But the brigade will arrive on a call. And what? Nothing. If the police come to such costume parties, it means that the management is aware of it, and at least the case will be closed. At the most, they can either kill him in the same basement and bury him here or put him in jail for something. I mean, even if it's for abusing Kathy. So think, Michael, think. Maybe you're imagining things. Yeah. And the cops are here for nothing. But at that very moment, the basement door opened and a policeman came running out. "Vasia," he shouted, "I've been away for a couple of hours. There's an emergency at the police station, but I'll be back later. Leave me that girl for later." And the policeman rushed to the car. The guy heard the engine roar and the tires skid across the sand. But the strangest thing was that from the cellar no one answered him, and no one had ever closed the door. It wasn't locked. It's called come in. Whoever wants in and whoever wants out. Whoever wants in and whoever wants out. Michael rushed to the cellars and started to go down the stairs, listening to every sound. But he heard nothing, neither footsteps nor any other sounds. There were supposed to be at least 4 people down there. And they certainly weren't singing lullabies, but maybe it was for the best. The boy opened the cellar door and slipped inside. The corridor was sparsely lit, and there was a pantry open right next to the entrance. The guy peeked into it just in case, to make sure there was no one there. And in case of emergency, he could hide in this room. Yes, there are shelves and bears in principle a place for a hiding place. But at that very moment, at the end of the corridor, footsteps were heard. It was the guest of the night police and the head doctor. The boy immediately recognized the figure of his superior. They were talking quietly about something, and as they approached, the boy could hear what they were talking about. What he heard made him not just overcome, but terrified to the point of truly experiencing fear not only for the poor girl, but for his own life. "Noah, thank you for the welcome. But you see, the warden's gone. We've had an emergency at the council since this morning. The commission's here, so we're saving Kathy for dessert, so to speak. Yes, you understand correctly. Everything is normal. No excesses or incidents. No one is interested in anything. Yes, in principle, everything's fine. Except we got a new orderly coming in for an internship. We didn't apply for the internship, but he did. So, they're interested in the job, and the clinic in particular. Why are our patients dressed so oddly? Of course, like you said, it's all been blamed on the tour and the theater we had a year ago. And then they disbanded it. But I don't think he believed it. So what do you suggest? Maybe we should press him a little so he doesn't stick his nose where it doesn't belong. No, I think I can handle it. And you know, it's normal to be questioned about our clinic. Michael listened and realized it was about him. His breath cleared, and he even found it hard to breathe. And as luck would have it, the couple stopped near the open door to the storeroom, where the new employee was hiding behind the racks with his colleagues. The policeman looked into the storeroom, but seeing nothing, quietly said to the head doctor, Okay, Noah, let's postpone our sit-downs for the time being. Lie down while holding this girl. The chief liked her, and the school drill outfit matches. We'll be there in a couple days. In the meantime, we'll be in touch. Call me if you need anything. The head doctor didn't say anything. He escorted the guest outside and returned a couple minutes later. Michael, all these minutes, which seemed like hours to him, sat and did not breathe, although his heart was pounding frantically and was ready to jump out of his chest. And this breathing and heartbeat, it seemed to the lad to be striking a bell in the silence. But there was nothing he could do about it. The boy heard the head doctor pass by his cell and head deep into the corridor, muttering something to himself. After a few minutes, he looked out of the door and, seeing no one, slipped out into the street. He breathed in the cool air of the night and took a few deep breaths in and out and began to make his way toward the dead vine. At the fence, Michael walked slowly, not even looking around, being in slight shock at everything he saw. What could be going on in there? What did I see there? Nothing. Just heard the doctor and the cops talking about something. But I don't know what they were talking about. Maybe it's some kind of videotape as part of a police investigation. The guy was trying to drown out the thoughts that kept popping into his head, and he'd heard of costume parties like this a long time ago. But to have minds devoid of girls and women take part in it, there was no such thing. All right, who am I kidding? Trying to fool. There's definitely something going on in that basement that's scary and illegal, and it's got to stop. Poor girls. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do. He'd have to go to Uncle Benjamin. That old bastard will surely tell him what to do, won't he? How? He'll help. The guy did not notice how he reached the house, how he went up to the floor and opened the doors with his keys, closing them quietly. Michael leaned against the wall and from powerlessness and experience simply slid to the floor. Grandma came out of the room at that moment and flicked the light switch. The bright light blinded the guy. And realized, "Grandma, why are you awake?" He tried to look normal, but apparently the expression on his face told the old lady everything. "Why? You want me to tell you why? What happened? Tell me." "You're white as chalk." "Grandma, I don't want to. I wish I was like this right now. Come on, go take a shower to wash off the negativity. Then we'll go to the table. I spared a cutlet, and I'll pour you one of my own." The guy did not argue, and simply went to the bathroom, pulled off all the clothes and scattered them on the way. When in the bathroom heard the sound of water, Betty collected the guy's things and threw them into the washing machine. "No dirt to lay around. I'll wash everything tomorrow." When Michael came out of the bathroom, there was a late dinner and a bottle of tincture on the table. The woman poured him a shot and handed it to him without saying anything. Nor did the grandson ask anything. He took it quietly and knocked it over. All at once. "Take the cutlets, mashed potatoes, salad. Let's eat." The guy sat down at the table without saying a word. He poured himself a second shot of olive and tipped it just as quietly and started on the homemade cutlets. He ate and thought, should he tell his grandmother of his suspicions? But Betty was not so foolish, as modern young people might think. I take it Kathy had gotten into the local psychiatric brothel and was simply being kept on psychotropic drugs. Michael chewed and nodded his head and simply couldn't drop a word. Not because he was eating, but because he was choked with emotion, and he didn't want to upset his grandmother. But his grandmother was not stupid and immediately realized everything as soon as his grandson entered the house. "You know, grandmother, there are not only doctors involved, there are also the police, and most likely, the very top. They came here today, twirled around and left. It's like an emergency in the department. So they didn't stay the night. And this girl." And then Michael shook from the experience. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and he couldn't stop. How could they do that? It's not just they're renting prostitutes who know what they're in for and where they're going. And all this with mentally ill women. How so? Michael, I get it. That's why I told you not to go there, but you wouldn't listen. And now you've got to figure out how to deal with it. You're not going to go to the police. You said it yourself. The whole chain of command is tied up. So what do we do? You can't go with a machine gun against everyone. You don't have to do it yourself. I told you. Go talk to our neighbor tomorrow. You know, the one below us, Benjamin. He's a thief. He's old school, I think. Plus, he's got a grudge against the police. So if he doesn't help, he'll certainly tell me what to do and who to turn to. The guy nodded his head and poured himself another olive. He drank and couldn't taste it. Slowly he digested all that he had seen and heard, thinking how he should proceed. But Babushkina's spit turned out to be quite strong, and already in half an hour the guy was pecking his nose. Go to bed, my sorrow. Tomorrow mother will come, and you with red eyes sleep, and then I'll cook for you for the evening. Pour the stuffed cabbage. With all this good stuff you'll go and ask your neighbor for advice. Grandma, thank you. I'm going. Michael only laid his head on the pillow, as he was immediately dreaming. He slept and did not dream. Though emotions so and so raged inside him. But apparently the young body could handle giving his head a rest. Indeed, he slept until almost lunchtime. And when he got up at 12 o'clock, he found no one home in the kitchen. All he caught was a note from his mother. Say, lunch on the table from his grandmother. Stuffed cabbage in her purse. Cash in the fridge in the back. We had a snack in Russia too. Michael went down to the second floor and called Uncle Benjamin's apartment. He didn't open the door right away, but he wouldn't let the guys in. Michael, do you want something? Uncle Benjamin, my grandmother gave you Golutsov, and he pointed to the bottle. And then I'd like to talk to you about a sensitive matter. The old one stomped on the doorstep. He liked Betty's stuffed cabbage, and it wasn't nice to say no to a neighbor. It wasn't proper. But he had guests he didn't want Michael to meet. The guy heard he had a stranger as a guest, maybe the lady of his heart, and he's here with his own problems. Uncle Benjamin, if I'm interrupting, I'm sorry, but can I come back later? Yes. Michael, I'm sorry, guest, come back at 8 o'clock. And here's Betty. A special thank you. Her stuffed cabbage is a work of art. Benjamin nodded his head and closed the door gently. Yeah, the stuffed cabbage and cash came in handy. There would be something to feed and drink an old friend. He came unexpectedly, and frankly speaking, the skull's visit surprised Benjamin and made him a little wary. And what does the skull need from old Kogan? And a vagabond? Yeah, maybe our old friend stomping on the doorstep for starters. Hopefully, the doorstep isn't where friends have a business conversation. Oh no, sure, come on in. Except there's nothing to buy. But I did not come here to eat. The restaurant will not feed. If you want strong tea with your girlfriends, I won't refuse. You owe me tea and my girlfriends. When Benjamin went to put the kettle on, the doorbell rang. It was Michael, but not the landlord. Neither did his guests know about it. Both were wary. But since Benjamin had long since retired and felt no guilt, he boldly opened the door. After talking to his neighbor for a few minutes, he returned to the room with the fools and the cash. Oh, I see the delivery service is working perfectly, joked the skull, yes, in the face of the upstairs neighbor. He came in to talk some business, so I brought this to butter the old man up. But I asked him to wait till tonight. In the meantime, try these homemade stuffed cabbage. By the way, and cherry is a delight. The men sat down at the table, poured a shot glass each, and, having drunk, had a snack. And how not to drink, because it would make the conversation easier. Benjamin looked at the old thief in the law and quietly asked, what brought you to me? You didn't just come 10 years after our last case. Yes, I did. And for good reason. I'll tell you right off the bat. I was put in charge of this town not that long ago, but I think you already know that. Now, I've heard rumors that young girls and women have been going missing in this town for the last few years. Well, you can blame it on anything, although all roads lead to your local mental institution. You know what I'm getting at? Yeah, I've heard bad things about her too, Benjamin said, and poured another round of shots. But how can I tell you, Skull? They're just rumors. You know, you can't do anything without proof. That's true. But in addition to the fact that young girls have been brought into this almshouse and treated for whatever reason, the cops have been frequenting it in recent months. They probably set up a brothel there together with the doctors and have fun there. And how not to party? It's a hell of a roof. Skull, are you sure? The old watcher nodded his head and threw a piece of fool into his mouth. He poured himself and his friend a shot for cream. What was there to say? Home-cooked food, still, that delicacy and luxury. And he, as an old thief who had spent most of his life in colonies and prisons, understood that. But that's not what we're talking about now. The daughter of a street Petersburg authority figure is missing. And so far, all roads lead here. You see, Alex's daughter is missing. Well, you remember him. He was on my team. Then he retired. He's got a family, but his daughter's missing. And all roads lead here to this mental institution. Yeah, and you said she could be in that new house. What about him? What did he do? He's been raising his own, and he's almost filed a police report. But nothing. Benjamin sat and thought about it. He really heard from his friends that in the last couple of years young beauties began to disappear and that it was the doctors or the cops who were involved. But that was talk, and no more evidence. But if the daughter of an authority figure has disappeared and the tracks led here, that's serious. Skull, couldn't it be a banal showdown? It's been speculated. But no, that's not it. Is that why I need your help? How long have you lived near this fine establishment in this town? Take a good look, Skull. By the way, Michael, but the guy who came in the other day with these fools, he works there as an orderly. How does he work? I think he's been there a while. But I asked him. That's what we decided. But in the evening, Benjamin didn't even have to ask the guy. 8 o'clock sharp. He was already sitting in his kitchen and drinking strong and sweet tea, which the owner had brewed, and put in front of the guy. Come on, complain. Who has offended? What happened? Yes, you see, I only have a son-in-law here. You know, I finished the basic course in my medical school, and now I'm practicing. But guess what? I know our psychiatric clinic. I've complained before. And I warned you, it's gonna be tough out there. But what happened? And by the way, I have a couple questions for you about your psych ward. Later, though. Now, come on, tell me. So my grandmother and some other people said there was something going on there, but I didn't believe it. But my grandmother pointed out one thing to me. They dress. The young and beautiful in short dresses and stockings and braid their hair. And do you know why? Michael looked at his neighbor, and in his throat stood. He couldn't say it out loud, but he knew he needed help, at least in advice, at least in deed. The old thief sat and looked at the guy, realizing that he not only needed to speak out and ask for advice, but the conversation itself was going in the right direction for him. You see, Uncle Benjamin, they raped them there. Maybe they're even videotaping the whole thing. The guy just gasped at his own words and the realization that Kathy was there and what could be done to her. He took a breath and continued. That's why I came. I've heard about this clinic for a long time, but last night I decided to go and look around. But in short, Uncle Benjamin, I saw 2 cops going down to the basement, as well as our head doctor as an orderly, and they were taking a new girl down there. But apparently the cops had some kind of emergency, and they left quickly. But most importantly, I heard one of them telling our head doctor to leave the girl for later. The guy briefed me on the whole thing and looked at the reaction of the old tramp. On his face was read not only surprise, but also interest, especially a last news. Kathy was the name of the daughter of a street Petersburg authority who was considered missing or even killed, almost by order of the opposing gangs. And what does this girl look like? Tell me. I'm sorry, I'm asking you this for a reason. A friend of mine had a missing daughter. Her name was Kathy, and it all leads back to our town. Maybe it's her. The guy thought about it for a minute and started describing her in detail. But the most important feature the guide remembered was a scar on her left ankle. Then he listened and couldn't believe his ears. He knew the street Petersburg authority Alex and his daughter, and the very scar the girl had gotten, falling from a tree. His heart stabbed. Wow, that's how you find an authority figure's missing daughter. That's lucky. But maybe it's not her at all. Michael, why don't you show her to me? But we'll go tonight, when the patients are out on the street. Show it to me gently. But in terms of what's being done to them, we'll have to get into that basement, look in the nooks and crannies. Can you get the key? Michael shook his head negatively, but Benjamin just waved his hand. What can I expect from you? He went into the room and rummaged through the closet. A set of thieves' lockpicks was there. Basically, we can look inside this basement at night. Okay, Michael, when are you going to work? Tomorrow. Well, we'll go together early in the morning. You'll show me from afar the basement, and then if you're psychotic, sorry, patients are walking around. Point your finger at Kathy. They don't go out this early. They only let them out at lunchtime and in the evening. Okay, well, just show me the basement, and then at lunchtime, I'll come to that walk, and you can show me Kathy. But why? Uncle Benjamin, you think she's your friend's daughter. I knew for a fact she was no fool. From your description, it looks like it, but I'll have to see for myself. So, Michael, it would help if you showed her to me. As for proof, I can pick any lock. Just dibs. It's our secret. I'll look, and then, if there's anything interesting, we'll figure out how to proceed. Michael was fine with that, and he calmed down a bit. But then I asked him the same question. What if there is nothing there that can be caught on? Michael, you're like a little child. I know exactly what to look at and what to look for. And then we'll set up a camera and film their antics. The old bastard chuckled, but when he looked at the boy's face, he stopped short. Yeah, I guess he wasn't laughing. Although, if you think about it, it's the height of cynicism to do such a thing as people in white coats and the police cover for them. Yeah, I got a special thing for the police. Plus, if this Kathy brothers thank me very much. Michael, I'm sorry. I guess years in places not so remote haven't made a saint out of me. But I do feel sorry for your charges, especially since some of them were just stabbed with antidepressants and sedatives, and now they're doing this. But that's okay. I'll take a look. We'll set up cameras if we have to. Then I'll report everything to the gang, and they will disperse your gang in no time. Michael listened and understood that the neighbor could do all this. But how to get the whole gang out? Uncle Benjamin. But understand, the proof for your friends is good, but the case must be taken to court. Michael, do you take me for a fool? Imagine for a minute, if we're looking for my friend's daughter, he'll make such a scandal. He'll involve everyone he can. Lawyers and press, law enforcement, you name it. But most importantly, your head doctor and his cronies won't get away. That's what I need. Michael closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. For some reason, he believed this old jailer, although he realized that Benjamin was not without sin. All right, Benjamin, let me show you the loophole in the fence at the entrance tomorrow, and then the cellar itself. And you can come to this vine by 12 o'clock. That's when our patients take their lunchtime walks. I'll try to show you Kathy. Benjamin nodded and sipped from a cup of strong tea. He was satisfied with today. Helping Skull and freeing Kathy would be a big plus for him. and he'd been wanting to mess with the cops for a long time. If they were really nasty in that asylum. Michael got up and went home. It was almost 22 o'clock on the clock. It was necessary to wash and sleep. Tomorrow was a crucial and decisive day. In the morning, Benjamin, already 6:45, stood near the entrance and smoked. He put on a dark, unremarkable suit cap and dark glasses. He pulled up a cigarette and thought about the situation with Michael, Kathy, and this almshouse in general. Uncle Benjamin, hello. Michael greeted his neighbor and extended his hand to him. The man flashed him a cigarette and shook his hand. Quietly, Michael said, "Just call me Benjamin without uncle. I feel like an old man. I'm not young, but I'm not an old man at heart." "All right. You ready to go?" He nodded, and the men walked slowly in the direction of the psychiatric clinic, talking among themselves. Like old friends, Michael walked and looked around so as not to catch the eye of the head doctor or one of the orderlies. There was no need to draw attention to himself. Approaching the fence of the psychiatric clinic, Michael looked around carefully and pointed with his hand to the entrance to the basement. "This is the basement, and there's an opening further along the fence into the grounds. Just right for you. Just right. Now let's move on." They went further, passing the very gap in the fence, which was so advantageously disguised by the leaves of wild ivy and vines. Michael looked around again and pointed to the platform. "In front of the main entrance. This is our so-called women's quarters, and it's where our patients walk from 12 until lunchtime. If anything, I can say from my observation, Kathy often likes to stand under that London tree, which is closer to the road. I've noticed her standing under the tree a couple of times, looking out at the roadway." Kathy nodded his head and lit a cigarette. He went on his way, throwing a few words to the guy. "Good, then I'll see you tonight, or rather, tomorrow. Drop by my place in the evening to look at the collections." Michael looked at his neighbor and said nothing. He's weird. But on the other hand, he needs help now. And if the neighbor helps, it will be great. After all, even one life-saving achievement of medicine shift this day went quietly. No incidents, excesses, or patient antics. No nighttime police visits that might have suggested bad thoughts. Except that Kathy was restless this day. Michael watched her from the residence window, and at one point, noticed the girl becoming anxious. She began to wave her head intensely, and her ribbons in her hair fluttered in the wind. Then she turned abruptly and ran away from the fence. Directing his life toward Black Pond, the boy looked carefully at the roadway. Near the curb stood a dark blue, unremarkable car, old, but on the move. Strange. "Who is it?" Michael said it out loud. And then another orderly, Liam, turned around and looked out the window. "What kind of car is that? We've got to get to the bottom of this." And he ran out of the office, and in a few seconds his broad back the guy saw near the fence. The orderly waved his hands, shouted something in the direction of the driver, but apparently it had no effect. A few minutes later, though, when the chief physician started to approach the car suddenly sped off. "That's an interesting situation. What's all the fuss about? It's just a car. You can't even see through the tinted windows. Who's in there?" After a couple of minutes, Liam entered the office red as a boiled crawfish and started pacing the room back and forth. Michael at first said nothing, and then asked with the most indifferent tone possible, "And who was it in the car?" "Yes, you see, Michael, one psycho or psychos drive here under the fence and look at our patients. File a police report." The guy deliberately put such a provocative question, looking at the orderly and watching his reaction, but his face reflected nothing but anger and irritability. "What's the use of these cops? They only throw up their hands. They say it's none of our business. No corpus delicti and all that. And we have to run around chasing these assholes away. Yeah, there's plenty of crazy people out there. By the way, have you noticed how new this is? Kathy's patient react to that car? No, I didn't see her shaking, and she stood there shaking her head, and then she ran toward Black Pond. Oh, shit. Why didn't you say something? And the orderly rushed out into the street. I wonder why he reacted like that. Michael became curious, and he went to the window. The orderly was standing next to the head doctor, telling him something. Then he pointed toward the pond, and they both went there at a brisk pace. This is interesting, thought the trainee, and quickly ran to the first floor. He went to the artificial pond, which enjoyed a bad reputation already on the shore of the notorious Black Pond. The guy caught a picture on the shore, sat Kathy, and swayed, and near her stood an orderly and the chief physician, and nervously smoked. Guy did not understand what was going on, so he approached the trio and nodding at the girl. Asked Noah, what happened? Yeah, you know, Michael. The first day Kathy almost went swimming in the lake, and when Liam said, she ran here, I thought she had a craving for water again. So she'd have wet her feet in waist-deep water. How can I put it, Michael? Our patients are such that they can drown themselves in a spoonful of water, and her reaction to the car, Liam told me about, also surprised me. She never showed any emotion before. Maybe the hypnosis has stopped working, and she is coming to her senses and grieving. You've probably been skipping classes on the subject of hypnosis, and it's the kind of thing that doesn't weaken over time. It's not sleeping pills or tranquilizers, is it? I guess, Noah, I guess. Both Michael and the doctor in charge stood by the lake for a few minutes, watching as the orderly took Kathy to the women's ward. I wonder what's going to happen to her and why she reacted the way she did to the car parked near the fence. Is there something to that? I'll have to tell my neighbor about it. Maybe he knows something, but the neighbor was the one in that car. Benjamin kicked his old broad out of the garage and thought it would be more convenient to watch the loony bin on wheels. It was at 1:30 that he drove the car up to the place where the loonies were strolling, and oh joy, near this fence stood Kathy. It was the daughter of the St. Petersburg authority figure. There was no doubt about it. Yes, he had seen her about 15 years ago. She had grown up and become a beautiful girl, but her eyes were still the same, just like when he'd seen her at her birthday party when she was 7. I wonder if the scar is still there. I should ask Michael to look at the scar on her leg. That's the only way to tell. I parked Benjamin's car with the window down and looked at the girl carefully. They must have drugged the poor girl with some pills. She's as good as dead. Eyes blank, all dressed up in some stupid costume. Yeah, I guess the guy's right about it all looking like something. The man rolled down the passenger side window more and called out to the girl. Kathy, listen to me. Don't be afraid. I'm Uncle Benjamin. Do you remember me? The girl stood there for a minute, paying no attention to the car and the driver. Then she turned her head and looked at him. At that moment, Benjamin waved his hand and smiled. But a meaningful thought suddenly flashed on the girl's face, and she began to shake her head, and then screamed and rushed running towards the park. Shit. Benjamin didn't expect such a reaction, and so quickly, closing the window, rushed out of the place in the direction of the city. I don't want to be seen here, otherwise they'll dump the office. Benjamin drove around the city for half an hour, and coming back, he could not resist and drove slowly along the fence of the psychiatric clinic. But there was no one in the yard. It must be lunchtime, the man said to himself, and decided to have a snack. He turned the steering wheel and headed for the nearest cafe to drink strong flavored coffee and eat a sweet mug. He had long favored this cafe with its own pastry shop. It served the strongest coffee and delicious pastries, just like when he was a kid. Yes, the man thought, when my grandson comes to visit me, I'll definitely bring him here with his father to drink coffee and eat more delicious food. But emotions came over Benjamin at the mention of his grandson, and a traitorous terror returned to his eye. You're not well. The waitress came up to the man and handed him a menu. No, the girl just remembered his grandson, who lives abroad with his father, and thought that it would be nice to bring him here. It's just a bit of a rush, so to speak. I understand. Coffee and a mug for you as always. Although, I'd advise you that our pastry chef has never tasted better. Let's have your labor. We should try it. Because, girlfriends. The man drank coffee and smiled at the rays of sunshine that penetrated the cafe, fell on his table and hands. It was so good to just sit there and think about nothing and enjoy every minute. But he had to go home and think about how to plan his evening, or rather, his night out at the clinic. Benjamin paid for his coffee and, leaving the waitress a generous tip, drove home. Already at home he slept, touched up, under the shower, and after making himself a strong tea, sat down in the kitchen. Coffee is good, but strong and sweet tea helped him to think. Probably habits from places not so distant were making themselves known, but he had long ago stopped paying attention to the fact that he was sitting down and what people would think of it. And now he was helping a friend whose daughter had disappeared under very strange circumstances. A traitorous terror came to Benjamin's eye again. He remembered his daughter, beautiful and clever, who had gone to the Emirates and found her happiness there. How she was happy about her new job. And her husband, who, to his credit, loved her very much. Pregnancy and rejoiced. But, so Benjamin Nikita do not need to wipe the snot and pull Kathy. And the man began to pack a backpack, a flashlight, and an old lockpick set for a night out. Machine oil, so the lock wouldn't stick, if anything. Now, having lost one daughter, he wanted to help his friend Kathy's daughter get out of the asylum. The man had long thought about why she had been kidnapped a year ago from her father's home, and many people had written it all off as a thievery. But that's not the case here. Alex is a competent and clever man. He's handled the most heated disputes, so sworn enemies parted as friends and best partners. And here, who would take revenge? No, the man shook his head. It's something else, he thought to himself, not what others think. Why did he think that? He didn't know. But if the girl he'd seen today was Kathy and was his friend's daughter, Benjamin realized what the reason might be. The girl had an unearthly beauty, her figure, long blonde hair, blue eyes, and she had the same mind as her father. And if he was right, then she was probably kidnapped by visiting tourists who were in the business of kidnapping and shooting racy movies. Maybe that's what happened. But the man was simply afraid to think what Kathy might have done. After all, even among the right criminal authorities, violence is a forbidden topic. A woman must be loved. She must be persuaded. You have to placate her with gifts and kisses, but you can't rape her. All the more to shoot nasty things against her will. It's one thing for a woman to do it for money. It's another to rape her. Well, it's gonna be all right now. Be patient, Kathy. Throwing his backpack over his shoulders, Benjamin went out into the street and headed towards the psychiatric clinic. It was already dark, and there were no stars in the sky. What pleased the old thief? He quietly approached the fence and skulked away, but with a ducking motion. He stopped imperiously under a tree and looked around. There was no one. There was silence. It was ringing dark. Only, in the windows of the first-floor patients' rooms, there was a dim light burning. That's good. That means I won't need a flashlight. This light will suffice. And the man rushed to the cellar, quickly oiled the lock, and opened it professionally. Benjamin did not hang it in place, leaving the door covered, but not tightly, so that in case of need he could quickly run out. The hinges should be oiled as well. It wouldn't be good if the door suddenly peeked open quickly. Coping with the hinges, the man began to listen to the sounds in the basement and slowly walked forward. The hallway was quiet. On the left side were storerooms, some closed, others without doors. That's fine, the old thief thought. There will be a place to hide in case of trouble. Strange. where these subhumans had found a porn studio. But at the very end, Benjamin saw a massive door, so stuffed with felt. Yeah, there you are, and soundproofed at the very end so no one could hear the girls screaming, the bastards. He went to the door and listened. But what kind of work had been done there? But what kind of barrier was there? There was no door that could not be opened by an old thief who had gone through a fine school. Indeed, the locks were also hidden under a layer of felt. Good point. No sound will get through the gaps. Well, that's clever, but I'll get you open. The man lifted the layer of felt carefully and listened. Quiet, which means no one. That's good, which means we can work. And Benjamin carefully began to pick the lock. Yes, it's a fancy lock, but for a craftsman like me, it shouldn't be too hard to pick. And after a couple minutes, the man opened the door to the secret studio. Wow, that's quite a spread. The furnishings, state-of-the-art, technology, and newfangled digital equipment, all put to great use. No wonder with the police running it all. And apparently, they're making a lot of money. Yeah, I guess crazy movies are popular with crazy people, but that man heard how heavy doors, covered with his lacquer, began to open, and without thinking, Benjamin jumped under the bed. That's quite a situation. At least the bed was wide, and it was covered with a long sheet all the way to the floor. Shit, thought the thief. What a fool not to listen to what was going on outside the door. So I got him. The main thing is not to suspect anything and not to search the place. But apparently the unexpected guests didn't suspect a thing. Oh, look, Noah's already opened the door. Didn't have to fiddle with the lock. Yeah, Stas. It's a nice studio. There's plenty of room for fun. And the man sat down on the bed and took pictures, and he laughed. Apparently, it was the cops Michael was talking about, who had been let in by the head doctor. So Benjamin quietly exhaled and listened further. Yes, boss. What are we going to do here? Are we going to film racy scenes? No, just participate. We got some local girls from the head doctor. So we'll try new things, boss will. It's not very exciting, but it's mental. I don't know what's on her mind. Would she bite or stab at the peak of pleasure? No. Yeah, well, it's a valid concern, Benjamin thought. But if you had a knife, you'd be so heavy. You'd be falling out of bed. You must be 150 pounds. And all that on a young girl. Ugh, that's disgusting. But what to do? So far, luck was not on his side. But then another man came into the room and said, "Sorry, Mr. Mikhailovich, I can't make it today. Apparently, it's either the moon or the stars. But our girls are on a rampage." Aha. Apparently, the head doctor tearfully apologizes for his wards. But apparently, the police brass didn't like the news. And he's not happy. No, why is that? Or does the hospital no longer have the appropriate injections? We've injected a couple of times, and the girl sleeps well. Yeah, we've already injected them, but it's still wrong. I'm sorry. Come back in a couple days and I'll put them on hard shots. Then they'll be as smooth as silk. All right. The cop said grudgingly and got out of bed, walked towards the exit. But next time, there should be 2 or even 3 girls. The doctor answered nothing, but only closed the door behind his guests, locking it shut. After a few minutes, the thief crawled out from under the bed and began to look around. He decided not to rush out of the room, but to put his video camera here. He definitely needed proof of what was going on here. Kathy then. He can quietly get out of the room, but this office needs to be covered up, and he knows to whom he will send the received materials. To his daughter Alex. I'm sure he'd tear anyone's throat out. Quietly, looking around, only stopped her gaze on the partners who were closing the improvised window. So over there at the very top you can install a camera. Yeah, it was a good thing he had his introductions. And not too long ago, he'd been fitted with a mini camera that ran on batteries and turned on the recording at any movement. So, sweetie, put it up and film it here. And the other day I'll come and check what you've prepared for me and make sure the camera is in working order. Benjamin copied carefully his video, point, and check everything behind him, and quietly left the room. He locked the door and quietly walked out of the basement. There was no one near the entrance, but still God protects him, said the nun. The thief said quietly and began to walk along the walls to the cherished fence. Going out into the street, he took and walked along the road, pretending to stroll in the picturesque. Cat, taking in his hands a pre-prepared bottle of beer. And even if he was stopped by the police, they would not be able to attribute anything but an administrative offense to him. Although it's not like breaking into a mental institution, but I'll get over it. And with a quiet step, he went in the direction of his house. Got to the house. Benjamin quickly for about 10 minutes and already in his apartment, having thrown off his clothes and stood under the shower, he exhaled with relief. Yes, I have not seen such a case since the dashing 90s. But the good thing is now there will be evidence and grounds to visit you, gentlemen in white coats on legal grounds, and smash your balaganza with all the proletarian hatred. We've had a night's experience, and the smell of a psychiatric clinic. Old Kogan went to the kitchen and made himself some tea. He had to think calmly about what he had seen and how to present it to his Street Petersburg friend. The fact that they were making strawberries there, the man realized. And in principle, the camera will definitely record all the abominations. It's a matter of technique and time. But what about the girl who looked a lot like Kathy? You'll have to leave that to Michael. He works there, albeit as an orderly, but it would be easier for him to examine her under any pretext. Now, we just have to wait for the morning and for what Michael and I will bring. Benjamin turned off the light and left the cup on the table and went to bed. After all, the coming day also promised a lot of things to do and new information. It was necessary to have a fresh head to think everything over and make the right decision. Already, closer to 10 o'clock to the old thief at the door rang. Probably Michael, and he was not mistaken. Uncle Benjamin, I came straight from work to see you. May I come in? I've been waiting for you. I just got up and made breakfast. Give me my hands and sit down at the table. I don't feel like eating right now. Uncle Benjamin, do you have a lump in your throat? Our lunatics almost went crazy today. I don't know what happened, but they all went crazy. Some howled, others sang songs, and the women's ward all threw off their clothes. It was a restless night, I know. Michael looked at his neighbor perplexed, but did not ask anything. He sat down at the table and looked at the plate of scrambled eggs Benjamin had placed in front of him. I stopped by your lovely basement today and got into the spicy studio. And by the way, while I was there were visitors, most likely. Your Noah, the head doctor, and the police. But don't worry, nothing happened. First came the cops, then came your doctor and said that the patients are raging. So everything was quickly turned off. But it's not worth the wait. He promised them strawberries in a couple days. So, but no. But I left the video camera there for now. I'll pick it up in a couple days. We'll see what's on it. And then we'll figure out where to go and who to show it to. By the way, did you check to see if this new Kathy patient of yours has a cross-shaped scar? Yeah, the night before everyone else. I was working on her, and I got a good look at it. It's a small one just below the kneecap. Benjamin nodded and smiled. So it really is Kathy. She had been found. There was no doubt now. That was good. I'd have to get proof of the lechery, the doctors, and the police. Then we could celebrate victory. It's her, said Benjamin, eating scrambled eggs. There's no doubt now, but we have to wait a while. Let the camera capture everything, and then trust me, I know who to show the material to, and it won't go away. Uncle Benjamin, I realize You're a lawman, but it's one thing to have a criminal altercation and another. This needs to go to court. That's right. Sweet man. What did you think? Gangbangers in black cars are gonna come in and shoot everybody, and that's it. No, we're just gonna show them all up. And then there's the lawyers, the courts, and of course, the media. Don't worry about that. Just keep your ear to the ground at your job and try to make sure that nothing happens to Kathy during these days. By the way, who's giving her the sedation shots? Yeah, there's this Liam. Orderly, big guy with huge fists. Why? Try to make sure you get the job. You make sure you don't give the girl the shots. She has to come off the drugs and be, so to speak, sober and clear-headed when it all comes to a head. But even if things don't work out, just keep an eye on her. Michael nodded his head and smiled, acknowledging the breakfast. He himself hadn't noticed how hungry he'd gotten in 24 hours and practically gobbled up everything he'd prepared in one fell swoop. Yes, he had a good appetite. The landlord looked at the young orderly and smiled. The man brewed tea and took out his favorite girlfriends. Let's drink tea. And listen to me carefully for now. Michael nodded his head, began to listen to the old thief. He told him that Kathy, supposedly the daughter of one of the street Petersburg authorities, it was time to close this studio, and his help would be very helpful. And she wasn't mentally ill, more like a kidnapping victim. Half an hour later, the guy was on his way home. Uncle Benjamin's gonna go, or my mother and grandmother will be worried. And you call me if you need anything. And where will you find out? Okay, while we wait. If there's anything new, I'll drop by Grandma's. Thanks for the goodies. She's always spoiling the old man. What are you, an old man? You'll give the young ones a head start, won't you? And shaking hands, the neighbors parted. Michael opened the door and from the doorstep heard the smell of his grandmother's famous PR. She at his place always cooked her signature delicious and grandmother's pie. Smells like from the doorstep. Why'd you stay late at work? Oh no, I stopped by my neighbor Benjamin's. But there to talk, and I was going to talk to the old fella about something. Mom, don't coach. No one's safe from jail or prison. We all could be, just like in my Elms house, by the way. And the guy threw his backpack on the hall table and went to the bathroom to wash his hands. When he came out, he went into the kitchen, where breakfast was already on the table. Mom, I don't want any. I ate at work, but tea and cake would be great. Michael didn't tell her that he'd had breakfast at the old thugs. He didn't want to make his mother nervous. The woman looked at him carefully, but didn't say anything. Only the grandmother, apparently, guessed where her grandson had eaten, but shook her head, said nothing. Grandson, but I just put the pie on. We'll be ready only in half an hour. In the meantime, bear with me. All right, I'll help Siberia in the meantime. One boy nodded his head and gave his grandmother a peck on the cheek and went back to his room. Michael spent these days at home, waiting for information from Benjamin, but he was silent. They crossed paths in the yard a couple of times, but the neighbor only said hello and didn't say anything. And the guy didn't really insist. He understood that if he didn't say anything, it was the right thing to do. But on Sunday, Benjamin decided to check the familiar basement and take the camera. He didn't tell his neighbor about his plans. He decided to take the tape first, see what he had, and then act according to the situation. Late at night, Benjamin, as he did the first time, went to the cellar door and looked around. Everything was quiet, but the silence was deceptive. Come on, he had to go get the camera anyway, and he slipped downstairs, opened the greased door, and froze on the threshold. The man listened carefully to the sounds, but the silence was sepulchral. With quiet shuffling steps, Benjamin approached the very last door, orbited it, and varnished it and lifted it. At the keyhole, he listened carefully. Quiet. So the studio is not working for its intended purpose today. That's fine, no one will interfere. Quickly removing the camera, Benjamin headed for the exit, and just as quickly went out and closed the door as he came in. But as he passed the women's quarters, the man didn't hold back. He walked over to one of the dimly lit windows and peered through it at a bed and a dark-haired woman sitting on it. A woman dressed in a short dress with ribbons in her hair. Yes, thought the man. Another victim. How did I get the camera in time? He mentally pitied her because he knew what would happen next. But on the other hand, what could he do now? Nothing. Once outside, Benjamin walked home as before, pondering what he would see on the tape at home. He inserted the flash drive into the TV. The man began to watch the video, and what he saw there only confirmed his suspicions. And the worst and most disgusting, he angrily turned off the TV after a few minutes of watching, threw the remote on the couch, and went out onto the balcony. Yeah, that was to be expected. Okay, now we can show Alex all of this, and then let him think how to deal with these creatures and tell Kathy about it. Benjamin smoked a long time to calm down, and understandably so. Seeing all that filth, although he is a thief and experienced, has seen a lot in his life, but such a man has always respected women. But how do they even do it? They're sick women. It's unthinkable, and he couldn't find an answer. What's there to say? Mental illness must have its own degree of variance, or maybe it's congenital. Who knows? Benjamin threw the cigarette butt down and went to bed. What was it though? Even after a couple of minutes of watching, he was shivering. But apparently, fatigue and emotion took over, and the man fell into a deep but restless sleep. Already, in the morning, Benjamin was on duty on the balcony to look for Michael, who had to return from work. And when he appeared at the entrance, he called him and gestured for him to come up to him. Uncle Benjamin, anything new? Yes. Not on our honor. Remember I told you I put a camera in the basement? Benjamin nodded and beckoned him into the hall, turned on the video, and let him watch. It was filmed by Michael. The orderly was horrified to see the head doctor and his cronies having fun with sick women at night. He certainly did not expect such a thing. The boy closed his eyes and quietly said, "Turn it all off." Benjamin did not argue. It was really disgusting. He sat there and didn't know how to go on living with it. Opening his eyes, he looked at the landlord and asked if he had anything to drink. He nodded his head and took out a bottle of vodka from the bar. He hadn't been drinking for a long time, but he always had alcohol just in case, and now he put a glass of white vodka on his neighbor's face. He held it out and said, "Wait, I'll bring snacks." But Michael did not wait for an appetizer, but drank the vodka in one fell swoop and sniffed it with his sleeve. At that minute the host entered the room with a slice of sausage and cheese, but the guy nodded his head negatively and said, "I can have some more vodka, but at least you're behind the ring." Benjamin poured, sat down next to him. Michael drank this glass in one breath, and now he took a snack and looked at the old thief attentively, talking about what we'll do, what we won't do, and what you'll do. I already thought to show to whom it is necessary to give a report to their own, and I will wait what they will tell me. But I think it won't take long to get a reaction. I also asked you here on purpose. I want to warn you that there may be some serious inspections at your clinic in the near future. I'm aware of that. I hope everything's legal and these assholes don't get away with it. Don't worry, they won't. You tell me, how's Kathy? How can I tell you? I got the head doctor to let me give her shots, just for show. But I didn't. But then, you see, Uncle Benjamin, she came into the clinic sort of hypnotized. So, she probably doesn't realize where she is. Or maybe it's like, she's in there. And is she really mentally damaged? I hope not. Although we can't rule out that possibility. But now, the main thing is to get her out of there. And then other specialists will deal with her. And Michael nodded his head. He was sober as a glass even after 2 glasses of alcohol. Apparently, the nervous shock did not let the alcohol to work. The guy sat on his neighbor's couch for a while longer, silently leaned back, then looked at the man and said, "I'm going home. I need to be good. Just Michael, I'm begging you. Don't do anything on your own right now. Do you realize how dangerous this is? That's one thing. And secondly, you can't do anything on your own. You'll only make things worse for yourself and Kathy and the other." Patience. The boy nodded his head. He realized he was right. And it was stupid and dangerous to take any action now. All he could do was wait. But he didn't wait long. The very next day, he was summoned to work. "Michael, good morning. Is no bothering you? You've been summoned to work immediately." The head doctor's voice was frightened and trembling. "Good morning. What's wrong?" the guy asked. It was just for show. Did he realize what might be going on in his clinic? Nothing yet. Come on over." And the head doctor hung up. "Yeah, that's how you guys got moving." Apparently, the neighbor got the materials to the right place, and now the guy quickly got dressed and started to leave the apartment. When he was stopped on the doorstep by his grandmother, "Michael, what are you doing up so early?" the chief of medicine called. "I have to go to work for my shift." "So you didn't even bring any food?" "No, I didn't have a shift. There's something going on, and it's probably an emergency." "Okay." Then he slammed the door, and 5 minutes later he was at work. And what he saw made the guy very happy. A whole brigade of enforcers were crowding around the main entrance. Orderlies and doctors nervously stood and smoked in the distance, and patients were carefully taken out and put into ambulances. Michael approached the orderly Liam and asked Liam, "What is going on?" "Don't you see, OMON, we're raiding and cleaning up, and that someone is selling drugs. Go higher. Someone organized a porn studio in our basement, and they blamed it on our head doctor and a few of his henchmen. That's what it's all about." Michael made a surprised face, but at that very moment he saw Kathy being taken out of the women's building by 2 men and carefully put into a black Jeep. So she really was the daughter of a reputable thief. But thank God she wasn't mentally ill. He looked at her and was startled by the hand on his shoulder. "It was you, Michael." The voice was commanding and quiet at the same time. He turned around and saw a man dressed in an expensive suit. He immediately realized that he was either one of the highest representatives of the government or a criminal authority. Michael nodded his head and only wanted to ask, "Who are you?" But the man was ahead of him. "I'm Alexander, Kathy's father. Benjamin, your neighbor, told me everything about you, about your help. So thank you for bringing my daughter back. You're welcome. I know it doesn't have to be this way. It's mean and wrong. Kathy's gonna be okay." The man nodded his head and looked at the boy carefully. But he didn't say anything. And what could he say if he didn't know anything about his child's condition? But God willing, everything would be fine. He just nodded his head once more, thanked him quietly, and turned around and walked to his car, which immediately sped away. As soon as he closed the door, Michael stared after him for a few minutes, reflecting on the situation, and at that moment the chief doctor and his associates were being loaded into the truck. It was all over. Michael did not notice how his neighbor Benjamin quietly approached him and clapped him on the shoulder. Now all the members of the Corps de Ballet have been captured and sent to places not so remote. Believe me, my contacts will make sure of that. And Kathy, it was her dad, but in a black BMW. Yeah, I think she'll be fine. And you, neighbor, thanks for pulling her and the other women out of that bondage. Michael raised an eyebrow, perplexed, not really understanding what the neighbor was saying, but he immediately clarified. You see, Kathy isn't the only healthy woman in this almshouse. Many beauties were just grabbed on the street and brought here under the guise of one or another mental disorder. And what was done to them next, You know what I mean. Now the shop's been shut down. And a special big thank you from my friends." The neighbor patted him on the shoulder and went home. And Michael stood on the street and smoked for a long time, realizing that there could be a great number of such clinics all over the country. After all, there will always be people like his chief physician, the chief of police, prone to such entertainments. But now, Michael realized that there was one less clinic of debauchery, and it was his direct merit. He walked home and thought about how a person's fate can turn out. Even take Noah, the head doctor, a respected man, and an excellent specialist. But something drove him to such a crime. Kathy is the daughter of a wealthy father, albeit with a criminal record, intelligent, and beautiful. She had suffered at the hands of non-humans who could simply stab her with drugs to the point of being a vegetable. But that's all in the past now, and his town can breathe easy. "Oh, Michael, you got home from work so fast, lady. How's Grandma's pie cooking?" The grandmother looked at her grandson and realized everything on his face. She smiled and put her specialty pie on the table, pouring her grandson some tea-flavored tea. The woman knew that now everything would be fine in this town, and certainly no one else would get hurt. And all of this was due to her grandson. She was proud of him, as any grandmother would be. After all, it is probably right to say that one loves one's grandchildren more than one loves one's own children. Betty smiled, and after patting him on the head, sat down on a chair and carefully washed her specialty pie with doctors like him flying in both cheeks. One could be calm for every patient, for everyone.